The morning Finn got his conscription notice, Frost still clung to the wheat stubble in his father's field. 22 years old, back bent from a decade of harvest work, hands calloused thick as boot leather. He'd known it was coming. Every able male between 18 and 40 had known since the raid started 3 months ago. Still, seeing the king's seal on that scroll of parchment made his breakfast sit heavy in his gut like river stones. His mother didn't cry. Farm women knew better than to waste water on things already decided. She just pressed a hand to his cheek, rough palm against rougher stubble, and said what mothers had said to sons marching off to war since time began. "Come back. Just come back." The formation yard at Iron Mountain Fortress smelled like sweat and fear and the particular stink of 200 men who hadn't bathed in a week. Finn stood in the third row, shoulder to shoulder with farm boys and blacksmiths' apprentices and merchants' sons who'd never held anything heavier than a quill. The drill instructor paced in front of them, a female wolf named Rowan with a scar bisecting her left eyebrow and eyes like chipped flint. She didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. When an alpha spoke, even human ears heard the command underneath the words. "Half of you won't survive your first engagement." That's not pessimism, that's arithmetic. The enemy has been doing this longer. They're meaner, they're hungrier. My job is to make sure it's only half and not all. A kid 2 rows up vomited. Nobody laughed. They'd all felt the same churning sickness since arriving. Rowan continued her slow prowl along the ranks. The king is calling every able male because the alternative is watching Vex Blackridge's raiders burn through our territories like a grass fire. Some of you are wondering if this is worth it, if your life is worth trading for someone else's village. She stopped in front of Finn, made eye contact, held it. Last month, Vex's forces hit Clearwater, population 412. They burned the granary first so people would run into the streets. Then they burned the streets. We found 370 bodies. The other 42 we assume were taken. You know what happens to people Vex takes. Finn did know. Everyone knew. The rumors spread faster than the fires. "So yes," Rowan said, still holding Finn's gaze, "your life is worth it. Because the alternative is 412 bodies, and the next village, and the next, until there's nothing left to burn." She moved on. Finn let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. The barracks that night buzzed with whispered speculation. Someone said the king was planning a winter offensive. Someone else said Vex had twice the troops anyone estimated. A kid from the coast claimed he'd heard the war would be over by spring, one way or another. Finn didn't join this speculation. He lay on his bunk, staring at the rough-hewn ceiling beams, thinking about 370 bodies, thinking about his mother's hand on his cheek, thinking about the mathematics of war, where half meant 100 men in this room would be dead before snow melted. He wondered which half he'd be in. 300 miles north, in a war room that smelled like lamp oil and old maps, Cade Iron Peak studied casualty reports with the kind of attention most men reserved for holy texts. 3 months of border skirmishes, 127 dead, 340 wounded, 60 of those permanently disabled, 12 villages burned, civilian casualties approaching 800. The numbers didn't capture the screaming. The numbers never did. But numbers were what commanders worked with, because if you started thinking about the screaming, you'd never make another decision. Marcus, his second in command for the better part of a century, stood across the sand table where they'd built a 3-dimensional map of the territories. Small flags marked troop positions. Red for Vex's forces, blue for their own. Too much red, not enough blue. "We need reinforcements," Marcus said. His voice carried the exhaustion of a man who'd been fighting the same war in different forms for too many years. The militia from Ironwood could give us another 200, maybe 3 if we're lucky. Cade moved a blue flag 2 inches west. "If we pull from Ironwood, Vex will hit their mines. He's been probing that flank for weeks. He knows we're stretched thin. So we stay stretched thin and lose everything slowly, or we commit and risk losing everything quickly." Marcus's jaw worked. "There's a third option." Cade knew what was coming. He'd been expecting this conversation for weeks. The Ironwood Alpha has a daughter, 26, trained in strategy. Marcus moved one of the red flags, demonstrating a potential pincer movement. "Marry her. Secure the alliance. Get the troops." Cade's hands flattened on the table's edge. "I won't buy soldiers with a political marriage." "Then you'll bury soldiers because you were too proud to make a strategic alliance." Marcus's voice sharpened. "This is war, old friend. We don't have the luxury of principles. Cade looked up, met Marcus's eyes, saw frustration there, anger, and underneath, fear. They'd fought together for too long, bled together, buried friends together. Marcus wasn't wrong about the mathematics. But Cade had done the political marriage before. 200 years ago, an alpha's daughter from the western reaches. Beautiful, intelligent, completely unsuited to him in every way that mattered. They'd produced the required heir, maintained the required appearances. And every morning for 30 years, Cade had woken up next to someone he respected but couldn't love, feeling like he'd traded his soul for a treaty that fell apart the moment his wife died anyway. "No," he said quietly, "find another way." Marcus's expression went carefully blank, the way it did when he disagreed but knew argument was pointless. "As you command, my king." After Marcus left, Cade stood alone in the war room, studying the sand table. Red flags clustered at 3 points along the border. Vex was using new tactics, hit-and-run raids, poisoning water supplies, targeting civilians to draw out defenders, then ambushing the responders. Effective, brutal, completely outside the traditional rules of engagement that had governed warfare between packs for generations, which meant Cade needed to think outside those rules too. His eyes drifted to a small notation on the map. Riverbend, population 600, strategically worthless. No mines, no major trade routes, just farmers and shepherds and one exhausted healer trying to hold together a village that kept receiving the overflow of wounded from battles fought elsewhere. The reports about her had been filtering in for weeks. A healer's daughter, 19. Father killed 6 months ago in contested territory. She was the only medical care for 40 miles, and according to the soldiers she'd treated, she was keeping men alive who should have died 3 times over. Last week, a lieutenant had told him about watching her amputate a gangrenous leg with nothing but a leather strap for the patient to bite down on and a hunting knife she'd sterilized in whiskey. The kid lived. Shouldn't have. Did. Cade needed a field surgeon, desperately. The Army's medical corps was staffed well enough for garrison duty, but once they moved to active campaign, casualty rates would triple, quadruple. Having someone who could improvise, who knew local plants, who'd already proven she could work under conditions that would break trained physicians, that was worth more than 200 militia from Ironwood. The problem was conscripting a woman, especially a lone woman. The morale implications were disastrous. Soldiers would see it as the king dragging innocents into war. Some would see it as worse. An unattached female in a military camp attracted the kind of attention that ended in bloodshed and broken unit cohesion. Unless the idea formed slowly. Terrible. Necessary. The kind of decision that made sense at midnight in a war room but would feel like damnation in daylight. He could claim her as an intended mate, give her the protection of that status. It would be a lie, but a useful one. She'd have legal protection. The soldiers would have a clear boundary. And Cade would have the field surgeon he needed to keep those casualty numbers from spiraling into genocide. He'd tell her the truth, of course, eventually, after the immediate crisis passed, after Vex was neutralized. She'd hate him for it, but she'd be alive to hate him, and so would the soldiers she saved. 8 weeks. That's how long his intelligence suggested they had before Vex launched his winter offensive. 8 weeks to prepare, to train, to turn farmers into soldiers and a healer into whatever she'd need to be to survive what was coming. Cade pulled a fresh sheet of parchment toward him, began drafting the conscription order. His hand didn't shake. Commanders didn't have the luxury of trembling. But late that night, alone in quarters too large for one person, staring at a ceiling he'd stared at for 3 centuries, he wondered if there was a number. A specific count of lies told, and innocents conscripted and necessary evils committed. A point where the mathematics of war added up to something so monstrous that victory became indistinguishable from defeat. He didn't sleep. He rarely did anymore. Elena Thornfield's fingers were buried wrist-deep in a soldier's abdomen when the king's men arrived. The boy on her table, 17 at most, had taken a raider's blade 2 days ago. The wound had festered. Now she was digging out necrotic tissue while he screamed through the leather strap clamped between his teeth, and 2 of his squad mates held him down. She didn't look up when boots thundered on the floor outside her father's old surgery. Didn't look up when the door opened. Couldn't afford to. One slip of the scalpel and she'd nick the intestine. Sepsis would kill him faster than the infection. The voice that spoke was female, controlled, the kind of control that suggested violence held on a very short leash. Elena Thornfield, You're hereby conscripted into the service of the Iron Mountain forces. You have 1 hour to gather essential supplies. Medical equipment will be provided. Elena's hands continued their careful work, teasing away corrupted flesh, exposing clean tissue underneath. I have 15 critical patients. I need 3 days minimum to stabilize transfers. You have 1 hour. Now Elena looked up. The speaker was tall, scarred, wearing the insignia of the king's personal guard. Behind her, a dozen soldiers in full armor. This wasn't a request. This was a seizure. I'm the only healer for 40 miles, Elena said. Her voice stayed steady through practice. She'd learned young that showing fear to predators just made them bite harder. If you take me, people will die. The soldier's expression didn't change. If we don't take you, more people will die. The king needs a field surgeon. You're it. Elena's patient whimpered. She returned her attention to the wound because whatever was happening with the king's men, this boy would die if she didn't finish. She worked in silence for another 5 minutes, cleaned the wound, packed it with a poultice of honey and calendula, stitched the layers closed with the tiny, precise sutures her father had taught her. Only when she'd wrapped the bandage and checked his pulse did she address the soldiers again. I need to brief my apprentice, write instructions for ongoing care, organize the medicine stores so someone less trained can find what they need. The soldier, Rowan according to her name badge, shook her head. 1 hour. That's non-negotiable. Then people will die. Elena met her eyes, held the stare. Let me be clear. I'm not refusing to serve. I'm telling you the practical reality. I can come with you in 1 hour and leave chaos, or I can come with you in 3 days and leave a functioning system. Your choice. For a long moment, nothing. Then Rowan's mouth quirked. Not quite a smile, not quite approval, but something. The king said you'd argue. She turned to one of her soldiers. Postguards. Anyone tries to interfere with her work, detain them. She has until dawn, 3 days. After they left, Elena's hands started shaking. She pressed them flat against the surgery table, feeling the tremor run through wood and bone and blood. 3 days. 3 days to teach her 15-year-old apprentice everything she'd learned in a decade. 3 days to prepare for whatever the king wanted with her. And underneath the fear, something else. Something that felt uncomfortably like relief, because she'd been drowning here. Drowning in wounded and sick and dying. Not enough hands or hours or herbs. Watching people die from things she could have fixed with better equipment, better knowledge, better anything. If the king needed a field surgeon, he'd have resources, a real medical corps. Maybe she could actually save people instead of just choosing which ones to let die. Her patient on the table groaned. Elena checked his pulse again. Still steady. She mixed a tincture for pain, measured carefully, helped him drink. You're going to be fine, she told him. Kept her voice gentle. You survived the worst of it. The soldier looked up at her with eyes too old for 17. Are you coming back? Elena didn't lie to patients, didn't know. The journey to Iron Mountain Fortress took 3 days of hard riding. Elena wasn't a skilled rider. Farm girls learned to handle plow horses, not war horses. By the second day, her thighs were raw, and every jolt sent pain spiking up her spine. Rowan didn't slow the pace, didn't offer sympathy. Just kept them moving dawn to dusk, stopping only to water the horses and eat rations that tasted like salted leather. The other soldiers kept their distance, polite, distant, like she was a commander's property they'd been ordered to transport undamaged. Elena didn't try to engage. She was too tired, too sore, too focused on not falling off the horse. But she listened. Soldiers talked around campfires, talked about the raids, about villages burned, about Vex's forces using tactics no one had seen before, poisoned wells, children used as shields, wounded left alive but mutilated, so they'd drain medical resources. One night, a younger soldier asked Rowan why the king was bothering with a healer when they needed more fighters. Rowan poked the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into darkness. Because fighters die, and when they die, we lose everything they learned. But if a healer keeps them alive, they fight again, and again, until they're good enough that they stop dying. She looked across the flames at Elena. The king doesn't conscript useless things. It wasn't a compliment, just a statement of resource allocation. Elena should have felt insulted. Instead, she felt something like respect. This woman understood the mathematics of survival. On the third night, Elena overheard something that made her blood run cold. 2 soldiers talking in low voices, thinking she was asleep. What's the real story with the healer, conscripted or claimed? Does it matter? It does if some of the men get ideas. If she's conscripted, she's fair game after service. If she's claimed, well, you know what happens to men who touch the king's property. I heard it's political, some kind of alliance thing. They're calling her the intended mate, but it's just paperwork. Elena's breath caught. Intended mate. The words hung in the darkness like a noose. She waited until the soldiers were snoring. Then she found Rowan on watch, sitting with her back to a tree and a naked blade across her knees. Rowan didn't look up when Elena approached, just gestured to a spot beside her. Couldn't sleep? Elena sat, didn't waste time with preamble. Am I conscripted or claimed? Now Rowan looked at her. In the moonlight, her scar looked like a crack in marble. What did you hear? Elena repeated the conversation, watched Rowan's expression, trying to read truth in the careful blankness. You're conscripted, Rowan said finally. The intended mate status is political cover, keeps the soldiers from seeing you as an outsider, gives you protection. Protection from what? Rowan's smile held no humor. There are 2,000 men at Iron Mountain. Most haven't seen a woman in months. You're young, unattached. Do the math. The words hit like a fist. Elena's hands curled into fists. So I'm bait, or a lie, or both. You're a necessity. Rowan's voice gentled slightly. The king needs a field surgeon. You're the best available. The mate story keeps you safe while you do your job. It's not personal, it's strategic. And if I refuse? Then you ride back to Riverbend and watch it burn when Vex's next wave hits. Because that's coming. Within the month. The only question is whether we have enough trained soldiers and enough medical support to stop it. Elena stared into darkness, thought about her patients, about the boy with the gangrenous leg, about her father, killed in contested territory, body never recovered, about 370 corpses in Clearwater. Fine, she said. I'll play the king's intended mate. But when this is over, when Vex is dealt with, I want the truth, all of it. Rowan nodded. Fair enough. They sat in silence after that, listening to night birds and distant wolf howls and the particular quiet of a forest holding its breath before winter. Iron Mountain Fortress rose from stone like something carved by gods having a bad day. Massive walls, towers that scraped clouds, gates thick enough to stop siege engines. Elena had seen drawings of the place in her father's books, but drawings didn't capture the scale, the weight, the sense of looking at something built to last until the sun burned out. They entered through a side gate. No ceremony, no announcement, just Rowan leading her through a maze of corridors that smelled like stone and smoke and the particular musk of too many wolves living too close together. Elena expected to be taken to quarters, to meet the king, to have some kind of formal introduction to whatever role she was supposed to play. Instead, Rowan led her directly to the medical wing. The smell hit first. Blood, infection, the sweet rot of gangrene. Then the sounds, moaning, screaming, the wet rasp of labored breathing. Elena's healer instincts kicked in before conscious thought. She was cataloging injuries, triaging by sound, already reaching for supplies that weren't there. The medical wing was chaos. Cots jammed so close together there was barely room to walk between them. Soldiers with bandages brown with old blood. A surgeon with his arms buried in a man's chest cavity, trying to clamp a bleeder while the patient convulsed. Orderlies running between patients with bowls of water that looked more red than clear. 200 wounded, Rowan said behind her. From the last border engagement 4 days ago, we have 3 surgeons. One is good, one is adequate. One shouldn't be allowed near anything more complicated than a splinter. Where do you want me? Elena asked. Her exhaustion had evaporated. This she understood. This she could do. Rowan pointed to the far corner. Gut wounds. We're losing most of them to sepsis. If you can improve that survival rate even 10%, you'll save 20 lives tonight. Elena moved, didn't wait for permission, grabbed a clean apron from a hook, tied it around her waist, and approached the first cot. The soldier there couldn't have been older than 20. Belly swollen, skin gray, breathing shallow. She peeled back the bandage. The wound was infected. Obviously, badly stitched, probably contaminated during the original injury, but the tissue around it wasn't completely necrotic. There was a chance. I need, she started, then stopped, looked around, saw an orderly rushing past, grabbed his sleeve. Honey, clean water, calendula if you have it. Yarrow, comfrey root, willow bark for fever. The orderly blinked at her. Who are you? The new surgeon, Elena said. Now move. Something in her voice made him move. Elena turned back to her patient, already reaching for the scalpel at her belt, the one her father had given her on her 16th birthday, the one she'd used to save 17 lives since arriving in Riverbend. She was about to make it 18. For the next 6 hours, Elena worked. Didn't stop, didn't slow, cut away infected tissue, cleaned wounds with honey and herb poultices, restitched with techniques her father had learned from traveling physicians and passed down, mixed tinctures for pain and fever, talked patients through the worst of it with a voice that promised competence even when she felt anything but. Around her, the medical wing slowly came into focus. The good surgeon was a man in his 50s, methodical and skilled. He nodded approval when he saw her technique. The adequate surgeon was young, fresh from training, trying hard but lacking experience. The terrible surgeon was drunk. Elena made a mental note to have him removed before he killed someone. Somewhere around hour 4, she became aware of eyes watching her. Not the patients, not the other medical staff, someone else. She didn't look up, couldn't afford to. The soldier on her table had a perforated bowel. If she didn't repair the tear perfectly, peritonitis would kill him within 2 days. The present stayed, patient, waiting. Only when she'd finished the stitching, checked the drainage, and moved to wash her hands did she finally turn. The man watching her was massive, 7 feet of muscle and bone and presence. His face looked carved from granite, hard angles, a scar running from left temple to jaw, hair black as midnight pulled back, and eyes the color of molten silver. She knew who he was before he spoke. Everyone knew. Cade Ironpeak, the Wolf King, 300 years old and still the most dangerous thing in the territories. He didn't introduce himself, just studied her with those unsettling eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was exactly what she'd expected, deep, controlled, the kind of voice that gave orders and expected obedience. "You saved 47 men tonight." Elena blinked. She'd lost count around 30, 47, hadn't realized. 17 shouldn't have survived, Cade continued. "But you improvised, used local herbs instead of standard compounds. Your suturing technique is unconventional but effective." "It's my father's technique," Elena said. She met his eyes because she'd learned young that looking away from predators just made them think you were prey. He studied under physicians from the Eastern Territories. "Your father is dead." Cade said it like a fact. No sympathy, no softness, just information. Killed in the borderlands 6 months ago. Elena's hands clenched. "Yes, Vex's scouts. They were targeting supply lines. Your father was in the wrong place at the wrong time." The words hit like a reopened wound. Elena had suspected, had known really, but hearing it confirmed made rage bloom hot and bright in her chest. Cade's expression didn't change. "I need you to save as many men as possible. We attack in 6 days. Casualty estimates suggest 200 wounded, 300 if we're unlucky. Can you handle that?" The blunt question cut through rage, brought Elena back to practicality. "With proper supplies and assistance, yes. Without, no. I'll need help." "You'll have it." Cade gestured and 3 orderlies appeared from shadows. "They'll follow your orders. I'm also assigning you 2 apprentice surgeons. Train them, quickly." "And the intended mate story?" Elena asked. "Might as well get it in the open." For the first time, something flickered in those silver eyes. Not quite guilt, not quite regret. Something in between. "Political cover," Cade said. "Keeps you safe, gives you authority. You don't have to like it. You just have to survive it." Elena wanted to argue, wanted to throw the lie back in his face. But 47 soldiers were alive because she'd worked tonight. In 6 days, 200 more would need her. She could hate him later. Right now, people needed saving. "Fine," she said. "But when this is over, when Vex is neutralized, I want the truth. All of it." Cade's mouth quirked. Not quite a smile. "Fair enough." He turned to leave, stopped, looked back. "Your father's technique, the unconventional suturing. It's based on Eastern principles of tissue harmony, minimizing scarring by following natural muscle patterns." Elena stared. "How do you know that?" "I'm 300 years old. I've watched a lot of people die, and a few skilled surgeons keep them alive. Your father was good. You're better." He left before she could respond. Elena stood in the medical wing, surrounded by wounded soldiers and the smell of blood and antiseptic, and felt something shift. Not attraction, not trust, but recognition. The king understood the mathematics of survival. understood that sometimes the only choice was between terrible options and catastrophic ones, understood that competence mattered more than comfort. It didn't make the lie about intended mates acceptable, but it made it explicable. And in war, explicable was sometimes the best you could hope for. That night, Elena was shown to quarters that were far too nice for someone who was supposedly just a conscripted surgeon. Private room, actual bed with clean linens, a window overlooking the mountain ranges that stretched endlessly north. She should have slept. Her body screamed for it, but her mind wouldn't stop churning. 47 lives, in one shift. At Riverbend, she'd been lucky to save 10 in a week. Here, with proper supplies and support, she'd saved almost 5 times that. How many more could she save with proper training? With assistance? With access to techniques and equipment she'd only read about in her father's journals? A knock on the door pulled her from calculation. She opened it to find a young soldier, barely 18, face still round with youth. "Ma'am," he said, and the title felt wrong. "I'm Finn. I've been assigned as your guard." "I don't need a guard," Elena said. Finn's expression suggested he'd been told she'd say that. "Maybe, but I have my orders. And honestly, it's better than formation drills." Elena studied him, saw fear under the bravado, saw a farm boy trying to become a soldier and not quite managing the transformation. "You're from Riverbend," she said. "I recognize the accent." Finn's eyes widened. "You're from there too? I thought you were from some noble family or something." "Healer's daughter," Elena said. "My father had the surgery on the east side of the village square. I know that place." Finn's face brightened. "My brother broke his arm 2 years ago. Your father said it. Did it so well you can't even tell which arm it was." "Small world," Elena said. Then, because Finn looked like he needed reassurance, "How are you holding up? With the training?" Finn's smile faded. "Honestly, I'm terrified. Half of us won't survive the first battle. That's what the drill instructor said." "That's statistically accurate," Elena said. Then, seeing his face fall further, "But the half that survives will be the ones who stay calm, who follow orders, who remember their training when everything goes to hell." "Have you been in battle?" Finn asked. Elena thought about the surgery, about 17-year-olds screaming while she cut infected flesh from their bodies, about holding people while they died because there was nothing left to do. "Different kind of battle," she said, "but yes." They stood in silence for a moment. 2 people from the same village, caught in the machinery of war, trying to find some kind of footing. "Get some sleep," Elena said finally. "If you're guarding me, I need you alert." Finn nodded, hesitated. Then, "Ma'am? I'm glad you're here. The soldiers, they're saying you're going to change things. Make it so more of us come home." Elena wanted to tell him not to hope too hard. Hope was dangerous in war. But looking at his young face, she couldn't quite kill it. "I'll do my best," she said. After Finn left, Elena stood at the window, watching moonlight silver the mountains. Somewhere out there, Vex was planning his next move. Somewhere out there, villages were burning. Somewhere out there, the mathematics of war were calculating who would live and who would die. Sleep wouldn't come. Her mind kept circling back to the numbers. 47 saved. 200 expected casualties in 6 days. The drunk surgeon who needed removing. The apprentices she'd have to train from scratch. The supplies she'd need to requisition. The protocols she'd have to establish. She pulled out the small journal her father had kept, leather-bound, pages worn soft from years of use. His handwriting covered every surface. Notes on herb combinations, diagrams of surgical techniques, observations about patient recovery times. The accumulated wisdom of a man who'd spent 40 years learning how to keep people alive. Elena had read it cover to cover a dozen times. Now she read it again, searching for anything that might help with the coming battle. Her father had included a section on mass casualty events, written after a mine collapse that had killed 30 and wounded twice that many. "Triage is mathematics," he'd written. "You cannot save everyone, attempting to will kill more than it saves. Divide patients into 3 categories. Those who will die regardless of intervention. Those who will live regardless of intervention. Those whose survival depends on immediate care. Spend your time on the 3rd category. Let the 1st category die with dignity. Let the 2nd category wait. It feels monstrous. It is the only way to maximize survival." Elena traced the words with her finger, felt the weight of them. Her father had been right, of course. He usually was. But knowing something intellectually and executing it while people screamed for help were entirely different things. A sound outside her door made her look up. Not Finn. The footsteps were too heavy, too deliberate. She opened the door before whoever it was could knock. Cade stood in the corridor, still wearing his war council clothes. He looked exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that came from weeks of too little sleep and too many decisions. Couldn't sleep either, he said, not a question. Elena stepped back, let him enter, watched as he moved to the window, same spot she'd been standing moments before. They stood in silence, two people staring at mountains and thinking about mathematics neither wanted to calculate. Finally, Cade spoke. I lied to you. Elena waited. Not about the intended mate cover, about why I conscripted you. He turned to face her. I told you it was because we needed a field surgeon. That's true. But it's not the whole truth. Then what is? Cade's jaw worked. 3 months ago, Vex hit a village called Clearwater. Small place, farming community, strategically worthless. I could have sent troops to defend it. Doing so would have left our eastern flank exposed. So I made a choice. Strategic priority. Let Clearwater burn to protect more valuable positions. Elena felt cold spreading through her chest. 370 people died, Cade continued. His voice stayed flat. Controlled. The kind of control that suggested volcanic pressure underneath. Vex didn't just kill them. He made sure they suffered. Made sure we'd hear about it. Made sure every village in my territory would know that I'd chosen strategy over their lives. Why are you telling me this? Elena asked. Because in 6 days, I'm going to ask you to make similar choices. Cade's silver eyes met hers. You're going to have soldiers dying on tables. More soldiers than you can save. You'll have to choose who lives and who dies. I need you to understand that those choices will haunt you. But you make them anyway, because the alternative is everyone dying. Elena thought about her father's journal, about triage mathematics, about the cold calculus of survival. I already know that, she said quietly. I've been making those choices since my father died. Something shifted in Cade's expression. Not quite relief, not quite recognition, something between. The 47 you saved tonight, he said. How many did you lose? Elena's hands clenched. 12. They were too far gone when I started. Sepsis too advanced. I could have spent hours trying to save them. Would have failed anyway. So I made them comfortable and moved on to patients I could help. And how do you sleep after making choices like that? I don't, Elena said. Not well, but I sleep better than I would if I'd wasted time on impossible cases and let the possible ones die waiting. Cade nodded slowly. That's the answer I needed to hear. He moved toward the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. The intended mate story, he said. It protects you, but it also puts a target on you. If Vex learns we have someone important enough to claim, he'll try to take you. Use you as leverage. I need you to understand that risk. I understand, Elena said, though she wasn't sure she did. Not fully. Rowan will continue your combat training, starting tomorrow. You need to know how to defend yourself. I'm a healer, not a soldier. Cade's smile held no humor. In this war, everyone's a soldier. Some just have different weapons. After he left, Elena returned to the window, watched the mountains until dawn painted them gold and rose, thought about Clearwater, about 370 bodies, about a king who'd chosen strategy over mercy and would carry those ghosts for the rest of his very long life. She thought about the choice he'd made conscripting her, the lie about intended mates, the political calculations wrapped around human need. She should hate him. Part of her did. The part that valued honesty over expedience. But another part, the part that had learned medicine from a man who valued competence over comfort, recognized something familiar in Cade's approach. He was doing what her father had always done, making the terrible choices so other people didn't have to, carrying the weight so others could sleep. It didn't make the choices right, but it made them understandable. The next morning arrived too quickly. Elena woke to Finn knocking on her door, young face anxious. Rowan sent me, he said. You're expected at the training yard in 20 minutes. Training yard? Elena's body ached from yesterday's surgery marathon. The last thing she wanted was physical exertion. But she went, because Cade had been right about one thing. In war, everyone was a soldier. The training yard was chaos. 200 conscripts running formations, drill instructors shouting corrections, the clash of practice weapons. Rowan stood in the center of it all, calm as stone in a river. She spotted Elena immediately, gestured her over. Basic combat assessment, Rowan said without preamble. I need to know what you can and can't do. I can't fight, Elena said. I'm a healer. Everyone can fight. The question is how well. Rowan handed her a practice knife. Wooden blade, weighted to feel like real steel. Show me how you'd defend yourself if someone grabbed you from behind." Elena had no idea. She'd never been in a physical fight in her life. Rowan sighed, motioned to one of the younger instructors. "Demonstrate a rear grab." The instructor moved behind Elena, wrapped an arm around her throat, not hard enough to choke, but firm enough that she couldn't slip free. Panic flared. Elena struggled, uselessly. The instructor's grip didn't budge. "Stop," Rowan said. "Let her go." Elena stepped away, breathing hard, face hot with humiliation. "That's what I expected," Rowan said. "Not cruel, just factual. You freeze. Natural response for someone who's never faced violence. We're going to change that." For the next 2 hours, Rowan taught Elena basics: how to fall without breaking bones, how to roll, how to use an attacker's momentum against them, how to target vulnerable points: eyes, throat, groin, knees. It was brutal. Elena hit the ground so many times she lost count, earned bruises that would hurt for days. But slowly, incrementally, her body started responding with something other than panic. By the end, when the instructor grabbed her from behind again, Elena didn't freeze. She drove her elbow back into his solar plexus, stomped on his instep, twisted free. It wasn't graceful, wasn't skilled, but it worked. "Better," Rowan said. "Still terrible, but better." Elena bent over, hands on knees, gasping. Every muscle screamed. "How long until I'm actually good at this?" "Years," Rowan said bluntly. "But we don't have years. We have 6 days. My goal isn't to make you a warrior. It's to make you dangerous enough that someone thinking about attacking you decides it's not worth the trouble." After training, Elena limped back to the medical wing, found the good surgeon, the older man who'd nodded approval at her technique, waiting for her. "Rowan said you'd need assistance," he said. "I'm volunteering." Elena blinked. "You're already a surgeon. Why would you want to assist?" The man smiled, tired lines crinkling around his eyes. "Because I'm 63 years old and my hands shake, I can handle routine procedures. But the complicated cases, the ones that'll come back from battle, I'll kill more than I save. You won't. So I'll assist. Handle the simple cases, learn from you, keep soldiers alive." His name was Thomas. He'd been a military surgeon for 40 years, had seen more battles than Elena had seen summers, and he was willing to learn from a 19-year-old girl because he understood the same mathematics her father had taught her. Competence mattered more than pride. Together they spent the afternoon reorganizing the medical wing, creating triage stations, establishing supply chains, training orderlies in basic wound care. The drunk surgeon was quietly reassigned to inventory management, where his incompetence wouldn't kill anyone. By evening, Elena had a system. Not perfect, not enough, but better than the chaos she'd found yesterday. She was reviewing supply lists when Marcus appeared, the king's second in command. She'd seen him in the war room yesterday, tall and severe and radiating the kind of authority that came from decades of command. "The king wants you at the war council," Marcus said. His tone suggested he didn't approve. "Why?" Elena asked. Marcus's expression could have cut glass. "You'll have to ask him." The war room was exactly what Elena expected. Maps covering every surface, terrain models built in sand, small flags marking troop positions, officers clustered around tables arguing logistics. Cade stood at the center, listening more than speaking. When Elena entered, every conversation stopped. 24 pairs of eyes turned to assess her. She felt every inch the imposter, a farm girl playing at importance. Then Cade spoke, and the room's attention snapped back to him. "This is Elena Thornfield, our field surgeon. She'll be accompanying the strike force to Vex's supply depot." He gestured to the sand table. "Show them your plan." Elena stared. "What plan?" "Last night," Cade said, "you suggested poisoning the water supply upstream of Vex's depot. Temporarily, non-lethal. Give us a window for attack." He looked at her expectantly. "Explain how it works." Elena's mind raced. She'd mentioned that idea in passing, half theoretical, hadn't expected the king to actually consider it. But 24 officers were watching, waiting, and Cade's expression said he expected her to deliver. So she did. Moved to the sand table, pointed to the river feeding the depot. Certain mushrooms cause temporary muscle paralysis, not permanent, not lethal, but enough to incapacitate for 6 to 8 hours. If we introduce them upstream here, current will carry the contamination to the depot within 2 hours. An officer interrupted. "How do you know it won't kill them?" "Because I've tested the dosage," Elena lied. Her father had tested it. Close enough. The compounds bind to nerve receptors, cause temporary blocking. Victims recover fully within 12 hours. Another officer, This one's skeptical. And if you're wrong, if the dosage is off, then we'll have committed a war crime and given Vex propaganda, Elena said flatly. But the alternative is a frontal assault on a fortified position. Estimated casualties 400 minimum. This way reduces it to under 50. The room went quiet. Officers looked at each other, looked at Cade. He's asking my opinion, Elena realized, in front of his command staff, making me part of the decision. It was political, obviously, tying her to the strategy so if it failed, she'd share the blame. But it was also something else, a test. Could she handle being in a room full of predators and hold her ground? Marcus spoke up. We're taking tactical advice from a teenager now? Cade's voice could have frozen blood. We're taking tactical advice from someone who understands chemistry and has a better plan than anything we've developed. Do you have objections to the strategy itself or just its source? Marcus's jaw worked. The strategy is sound, if the dosages are correct. They are, Elena said. Met Marcus's eyes. Held them. I stake my reputation on it. Then we proceed, Cade said. Elena, you'll lead the poison team. 10 scouts. Marcus, assign them. The meeting continued. Battle plans refined, supply lines discussed, contingencies prepared. Elena stood at the edge of it all, watching military minds turn theory into executable orders. When it finally ended, officers filed out. Marcus lingered, expression unreadable. He approached Elena after Cade stepped away to review maps. You'd better be right about those dosages, Marcus said quietly. Because if you're not, 400 soldiers will die in the assault anyway, plus whatever victims your poison kills. That blood will be on your hands. Elena met his gaze. If I'm wrong, I'll carry it, same as the king carries Clearwater. Something flickered in Marcus's eyes. Not quite respect, not quite understanding, but acknowledgement. He left without another word. Cade remained, studying the sand table like it held answers to questions he hadn't asked yet. You didn't have to put me in the council meeting, Elena said. Could have just used my idea. Yes, Cade said, still not looking up. I could have. Would have been easier. Then why? Now he looked at her. Because in 6 days, some of those officers will question your orders in the field. Will see you as the king's pet project. A girl playing at war. I needed them to see you defend your strategy. Hold your ground. Prove you belong. And if I hadn't, if I'd frozen, then I'd have learned you couldn't handle pressure and made different plans. Cade's smile was sharp. But you didn't freeze. You delivered. Same as you did in surgery. Same as you'll do in battle. Elena felt something shift. The weight of expectations settling across her shoulders like a mantle. Get some rest, Cade said. Tomorrow we start preparing the poison compounds. You'll supervise production. Day after, combat drills. Day after that, final logistics. Then we move. 6 days had become 5, then 4, then 3. Time was accelerating toward violence, and Elena was being pulled along in its current. She left the war room, found Finn waiting outside, young face anxious. How'd it go, he asked. I just got assigned to lead a team into enemy territory, Elena said. Her voice sounded distant, disconnected. I'm either going to help win a battle or kill everyone trying. Finn's eyes widened. He paused, searching for words. That's terrifying. Yes, Elena agreed, it really is. They walked back to her quarters in silence. Elena's mind churned with calculations. Dosages, timing. What if the current was faster than estimated? What if guards tested the water before drinking? What if? At her door, Finn cleared his throat. Ma'am? For what it's worth. I'm glad you're the one doing this. Better you than someone who doesn't care if they get it wrong. Elena looked at him, saw faith she hadn't earned, trust she didn't deserve. The weight of it settled next to Cade's expectations. Get some sleep, Finn, she said. Tomorrow's going to be long. Inside her quarters, Elena pulled out her father's journal again, found the section on poisons, read his careful notes about dosage calculations, margin of error, safety protocols. Her father had been meticulous, careful, would never have agreed to dose hundreds of soldiers based on theoretical calculations. But her father had never been in a war where the alternative was 400 casualties. Elena did the math 3 times, checked her calculations against her father's notes, adjusted for body weight, adjusted for water dilution, adjusted for current speed. The numbers held, barely, but they held. She'd stake her life on them. More importantly, she was staking 400 other lives. The weight of that settled in her bones, heavy, inescapable. Tomorrow she'd start production, carefully, precisely, no room for error. Tonight she'd sit with the weight of what was coming. In 3 days, she'd ride into enemy territory, would poison water supplies, would either save hundreds of lives or kill them. The mathematics of war were unforgiving. But Elena was learning that sometimes the only choice was between terrible options and catastrophic ones. And the people who survived were the ones willing to make terrible choices and carry the weight after. She pressed her forehead against the cold window glass, watched the mountains hold their ancient silence. Somewhere out there, Vex was planning, preparing, counting his forces and calculating his own terrible mathematics. In 3 days, 2 armies would collide, and a healer's daughter from nowhere would learn exactly how much blood she was willing to carry on her hands to save lives. The answer, she was beginning to understand, was more than she'd ever imagined, but less than the king carried daily, and that, somehow, made it bearable. The mushroom harvest took 2 full days. Elena led a team of 10 scouts into the forests north of Iron Mountain, searching for the specific variety her father had documented in his journals. Amanita paralysis, he'd called it, though the name was his own invention. Gray caps with white spots, growing only in shadow, only near rotting oak, only in the specific elevation band between 2,000 and 3,000 feet. The scouts thought she was insane. One of them, a grizzled veteran named Garrett, made his opinion clear on the first morning. "We're trusting our entire offensive to mushrooms," he said, voice flat with disbelief. "Mushrooms that might or might not paralyze people, that a girl who's never been in combat swears will work." Elena didn't look up from examining a cluster of fungi, testing the cap texture, checking the spore color against her father's drawings. "Yes," she said, "that's exactly what we're doing. Do you have a better plan?" Garrett had no answer to that. By evening of the second day, they'd collected enough. 50 pounds of carefully harvested mushrooms, packed in cloth bags to prevent bruising. Elena handled each one personally, checked for contamination, for rot, for any sign that the specimens were compromised. Back at the fortress, she set up production in a sealed room off the medical wing. Thomas, the older surgeon, assisted. Together they ground the mushrooms into paste, mixed with water at precise ratios, strained, tested on rats first, watching carefully as the animals went from mobile to paralyzed to recovered over an 8-hour cycle. The dosage calculations held, exactly as her father's notes predicted. Cade visited on the 3rd day, watched through the window as Elena worked, not interrupting, just observing. When she finally emerged, exhausted and covered in mushroom paste, he was still there. "It works," she said, tested on animals. 6 hours of paralysis, full recovery by hour 8, no deaths. "And on humans?" Elena met his eyes. "We'll find out tomorrow." Cade's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those silver depths. Not quite approval, not quite concern, just acknowledgement of the weight they were both carrying. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow you ride with the strike force." That night, Elena tried to follow orders. Lay in bed, closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Her mind kept running through the plan. The strike team would approach the depot at dawn. She'd introduce the poison 2 hours before the main assault. Current speed would carry it downstream. Guards would drink their morning water. Within an hour, paralysis would set in. And if the dosage was wrong? If she'd miscalculated? If the current was faster or slower than estimated? 400 casualties in a frontal assault versus potential mass death by poison. The mathematics were brutal, but they were clear. She must have slept eventually because Finn's knock woke her. Dawn light streamed through the window. Her body ached. Her hands shook slightly as she dressed in the combat gear Rowan had issued. Leather armor, too big, adjusted with straps and determination. Rowan met her in the courtyard. The strike team was already assembled. 10 scouts, 20 infantry for the assault. Cade himself leading. And Elena, the only non-combatant in a group designed to kill. She carried 2 bags. One held the poison compounds in sealed vials. The other held medical supplies, bandages, sutures, herbal painkillers, because even if the poison worked, even if casualties were minimal, there would be wounded. There were always wounded. The ride to Vex's supply depot took 6 hours, through forest trails barely wide enough for single file, past streams and ravines and terrain that made Elena grateful for the combat training Rowan had drilled into her. She fell twice, got back up, kept moving. No one helped her. This was the test. Could she keep pace? Could she handle the physical demands of field operations? By hour 4, her thighs were raw, her back screamed, but she didn't complain, didn't ask for breaks. Garrett, the skeptical scout, watched her struggle, said nothing. But when they stopped to water the horses, he handed her a strip of cloth. For the saddle chafing, he said, helps. It was the closest thing to approval she'd received from the combat veterans. They reached the staging point 2 hours before dawn, a ridge overlooking the supply depot. Elena could see it below. Wooden palisade walls, guard towers, the river running along the eastern edge. Exactly as the intelligence reports had described, Cade gathered the team, spoke in low tones that somehow carried to every ear. Elena poisons the water at 0400. Current will carry contamination to the depot by 0500. Guards change shift at 0600. New shift drinks morning water. Paralysis sets in by 0700. We assault at 0730. He looked at each person in turn. Questions? One of the infantry raised a hand. What if the poison doesn't work? What if they don't drink the water? Then we fight our way in the traditional way, Cade said, and a lot of us die. His tone made it clear which outcome he preferred. Elena and 3 scouts moved downstream, closer to the depot but still hidden by forest. The river here ran fast, white water over rocks, perfect for distributing the compound evenly. She pulled out the vials. Her hands shook slightly as she broke the seals. This was it, the point of no commitment. Once the poison entered the water, there was no taking it back. Garrett crouched beside her. You sure about this? No, Elena said honestly, but I'm sure about 400 casualties if we don't try. She poured the first vial, watched the gray liquid disappear into white water, then the second, third. All 12 vials, carefully measured, precisely calculated to contaminate the downstream water supply without killing. The liquid vanished, dispersed, gone. Now we wait, Garrett said. They retreated to the ridge, rejoined the strike team. Cade looked at Elena. She nodded. It's done. 2 hours of silence followed. Elena's stomach churned. She checked her medical supplies 3 times, inventoried bandages, mixed fresh poultices, anything to keep her hands busy. Beside her, Cade sat motionless, watching the depot through a viewing scope. His stillness was unnerving. 300 years of experience had taught him patience Elena couldn't imagine. At 0600, the guard shift changed. Elena watched through her own scope as fresh soldiers emerged from barracks, stretched, talked, moved to the mess hall, where they'd drink morning water. 0630, still no signs of distress from the depot. Elena's heart hammered. It should be working by now, should be seeing effects. 0645. A guard stumbled, caught himself on a wall. Another sat down heavily. It's working, Garrett whispered. By 0700, chaos erupted below. Guards collapsing, officers shouting, men trying to stand and falling. The depot was in complete disarray. Cade stood. Assault teams move. The next 30 minutes were a blur of violence. Elena stayed back with the reserve squad, watching as Cade's forces swept into the depot. The paralyzed guards couldn't fight, couldn't resist. The few who'd avoided the water were quickly overwhelmed. It was the most one-sided engagement Elena had ever witnessed. Not a battle, a capture operation. Casualties? 3 of Cade's soldiers lightly wounded when a guard who hadn't drunk water fought back. 0 deaths. Vex's forces, 67 paralyzed, 8 captured who'd avoided the water, 0 deaths. The poison had worked exactly as calculated. Elena moved into the depot with her medical kit, started checking the paralyzed soldiers, monitoring vital signs, making sure the compound wasn't causing unexpected complications. One of Vex's guards, a young man maybe 25, stared up at her with terrified eyes, fully conscious, completely unable to move. You're going to be fine, Elena told him. The paralysis is temporary. You'll recover full motor function within 6 hours. The terror in his eyes didn't lessen. She stayed with him, with all of them, monitoring, documenting, making sure her calculations held. By hour 4, fingers started twitching. By hour 6, most could move their arms. By hour 8, full recovery. Just as her father's notes had predicted. Cade found her in this depot's makeshift infirmary, surrounded by recovering enemy soldiers. She was checking pupil responses, documenting recovery times. It worked, he said. Yes. Elena didn't look up. But I still feel sick about it. Good. Cade's voice was quiet. The day you don't feel sick about poisoning 60 people is the day you become something you shouldn't. They're enemies, Elena said. They burn villages, kill civilians. Why should I feel anything for them? Because they're also 20-year-old farm boys who got conscripted same as Finn. Cade crouched beside one of the recovering soldiers, looked into his frightened eyes. Because if circumstances were different, you'd be treating him in your village surgery and he'd be thanking you. Elena's throat tightened. How do you do this? How do you carry it? Badly, Cade said. He stood, offered Elena his hand. But we carry it anyway. The ride back to Iron Mountain should have felt triumphant. They'd captured 3 months of Vex's supplies, taken prisoners, suffered minimal casualties. By any military standard, it was a complete success. But Elena couldn't shake the image of those paralyzed soldiers, conscious, terrified, completely helpless. She'd done that. Her calculations, her compounds, her choice. The mathematics said it was the right choice. 400 casualties prevented. Her conscience wasn't convinced by mathematics. They reached the fortress at dusk. Soldiers cheered when they saw the supply wagons. News of the victory spread like wildfire, the impossible mission, the brilliant strategy, the healer who'd found a way to win without bloodshed. Elena felt like a fraud. That night, she sat in her quarters, staring at her father's journal. He'd included a section on moral injury, the wounds that didn't bleed but never healed. All healers carry ghosts, he'd written. The patients we couldn't save, the choices we regret. The line between healing and harming is thinner than we want to believe. We walk it daily. Some days we stay on the right side, some days we don't. The trick is remembering that both sides of the line are still us. A knock interrupted her reading, not Finn's tentative tap, something heavier. She opened the door to find Marcus, Cade's second in command, expression unreadable. "May I come in?" he asked. Elena stepped aside, watched as Marcus entered, moved to the window, stared at mountains the same way Cade did when thinking heavy thoughts. "You were right," Marcus said finally. "About the poison, the dosages, the strategy. It worked. That sounds like it's killing you to admit." Marcus's mouth quirked. Not quite a smile. "It is. I thought you'd fail. Thought we'd lose men because the king trusted a girl with no combat experience." Elena waited. "I was wrong," Marcus continued, "and I came to tell you that, directly, because you deserve to know that you've changed minds, including mine." He turned to face her. "But I also came to warn you." "About what?" "The victory feast tomorrow night. The king will present you to the full court, formally acknowledge your contribution. It'll make you valuable, and in war, valuable things become targets." Elena's stomach dropped. "Vex will come for me." Marcus nodded. "If he learns we have a tactical asset this effective, he'll try to take you, use you, or kill you so we can't use you. You need to be ready for that." "I'm a healer, not a soldier." "You're whatever the war needs you to be." Marcus's expression hardened. "Same as all of us. Rowan will increase your combat training. You'll have a permanent guard detail, and you need to understand something." "What?" "If Vex captures you, if he tries to use you as leverage, Cade won't negotiate, won't trade, won't compromise the larger strategy to save one person, no matter how valuable." Elena felt cold spreading through her chest. "Even if I'm his intended mate? Especially then." Marcus's eyes held something like pity, because the mate bond story is political fiction. And Cade learned a long time ago that personal attachments are luxuries commanders can't afford. I should know. I served beside him for the better part of 2 centuries, watched him make that choice before. The admission hung in the air. 2 centuries, not the casual decades Elena had assumed. Marcus had been with Cade through most of his 300-year existence. "You've seen a lot," Elena said quietly. "Too much." Marcus looked away. "Lost a lot, too." He didn't elaborate, didn't need to. The weight in his voice said everything. After Marcus left, Elena stood alone in her quarters, feeling the complexity of what she'd stepped into. This wasn't just a war between territories. It was centuries of accumulated loss, decisions that haunted leaders long after the battles ended. The victory feast was everything Elena had dreaded. The great hall packed with soldiers and courtiers and representatives from allied packs. Tables laden with food and wine, musicians playing, the atmosphere of forced celebration that followed successful military operations. Cade had ordered her to attend, had sent formal clothes. A dress that was finer than anything she'd owned in Riverbend but still practical enough to move in. Combat boots underneath because Rowan had insisted. Always be ready to run or fight. Elena entered the hall and felt hundreds of eyes turn toward her, assessing, judging, wondering what made a farm girl worth the king's attention. Cade stood at the high table, gestured for her to join him. The crowd parted as she walked through. Whispers followed in her wake. That's her, the poison maker, the king's prize. Too young, too inexperienced. What makes her special? Elena kept her chin up, walked with the confidence Rowan had drilled into her during combat training. Never show fear, never show doubt. Predators can smell both. She reached the high table. Cade pulled out a chair beside his own, a position of honor that made the political statement clear. The feast began. Courses appeared, roasted meat, fresh bread, vegetables preserved from autumn harvest. Wine flowed freely. Soldiers celebrated survival, laughed too loud, drank too much, the usual aftermath of successful combat. Elena picked at her food. Couldn't eat. The atmosphere felt wrong, too festive. They'd won one engagement. Vex still controlled most of his territory, still had thousands of troops. One victory didn't end a war. And something else nagged at her. The winter offensive Cade had predicted. 8 weeks, he'd said, back when he first conscripted her. That timeline should be approaching. But here they were, celebrating, as if the larger threat had vanished. Cade leaned close, spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. You look troubled. The winter offensive, Elena said. You predicted it would come, but we're celebrating like the war is over. The depot raid changed the timeline. Cade's voice was patient, teaching. Vex was massing forces for a coordinated strike, but we took 3 months of his supplies. He can't sustain that offensive now. He'll have to regroup, resupply. That buys us time. How much time? Weeks, maybe months. Cade's expression was grim. Which is why we celebrate now. Tomorrow we plan. But tonight, the soldiers need to believe their sacrifices matter, that winning is possible. Elena understood the logic, but it still felt hollow, premature. The evening wore on. Speeches were made, toasts raised. Cade stood and formally acknowledged Elena's contribution, praised her tactical thinking, her courage, her skill. The applause was thunderous. Elena felt like she was drowning. Finally, mercifully, the feast ended. Soldiers dispersed to barracks, courtiers to their quarters. Elena escaped to the courtyard, desperate for cold air and silence. She found neither. Finn stood in the shadows, face pale, expression stricken. Ma'am, he said, I need to tell you something. Elena's instincts flared. What's wrong? Finn looked around, checking for listeners, then pulled her deeper into shadow. I overheard 2 officers, tonight, in the barracks. What did you hear? They were talking about you, about the king. They said the intended mate story is fake, that you're just a conscripted surgeon, that if word gets out, the men will lose respect for both of you. Elena's blood ran cold. Did they say anything else? Finn's jaw worked. One of them said he was going to challenge the king. For you, if the bond isn't real. Who? Finn hesitated, then Commander Aldrich, from the Ironwood Militia. Aldrich. Elena knew the name. Young, ambitious, from a powerful family. Exactly the type to see political opportunity in challenging Cade's authority. You have to tell the king, Finn said, before Aldrich makes it public. Elena's mind raced. If she told Cade, he'd have to respond. Probably kill Aldrich to maintain authority. More blood, more ghosts. But if she didn't tell him, if Aldrich challenged publicly and the lie was exposed, Cade's authority would crumble. The alliance with Ironwood would fracture. Either way, people would die. Thank you for telling me, Elena said carefully. I'll handle it. How? She had no idea. But Finn looked terrified enough already. He didn't need to know she was improvising. Go back to the barracks. Act normal. Don't tell anyone about this conversation. After Finn left, Elena stood in the cold courtyard thinking. She needed to talk to Cade, but not here, not where they could be overheard. She made her way through darkened corridors to the war room, found Cade there, exactly as expected, studying maps, planning, always planning. He looked up when she entered, saw her expression. What happened? Elena closed the door, told him about Finn's warning, about Aldrich's planned challenge. Cade's face went carefully blank, the way it did when he was containing rage. I'll have Aldrich arrested, charged with insubordination, executed before dawn. That will fracture the Ironwood alliance, Elena said. His family is powerful. They'll see it as murder. The alternative is letting him challenge me publicly, expose the lie, destroy unit cohesion. Or, Elena said slowly, the idea forming as she spoke, or we make the lie real. Cade stared at her. What? We complete the mate bond, tonight. Publicly enough, that word spreads. Then Aldrich has nothing to challenge. That's insane, Cade said. You don't even like me. I respect you. Elena held his gaze. That's more than most political marriages start with, and it solves the immediate problem without killing anyone. Cade shook his head. You don't understand what you're suggesting. The mate bond isn't just ceremony. It's a soul connection. Once formed, it's permanent. You'd be tied to me for the rest of your life. Better than being the cause of Aldrich's execution and the Ironwood alliance collapsing. They stared at each other, two people caught in impossible circumstances, making terrible calculations. Finally, Cade spoke. If we do this, it's real, not political theater. I won't dishonor you with a fake bond. I know. Elena's voice was steady despite the fear churning her gut. Do it. Cade moved toward her, slowly, giving her time to change her mind. Elena didn't move, didn't retreat. He stopped close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough to see the silver in his eyes catch lamplight. This will hurt, he said quietly. The bite, the bond formation, it's not gentle. I've amputated limbs with a hunting knife and leather strap. I can handle pain. Physical pain, yes. But this is different. You'll feel everything I feel, every ghost I carry, every choice I regret, every soldier I've sent to die. He searched her face. Are you ready for that? No, Elena said honestly, but I'm doing it anyway. Cade's hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. The touch was gentle, careful, nothing like the violence about to follow. Then he struck, canines extending, piercing the junction between neck and shoulder, the traditional mate bite. Pain exploded through Elena's nervous system, white-hot, overwhelming. She gasped, fingers digging into Cade's shoulders. Then the pain transformed. Something else flooded in. Not hers. Too heavy, too vast. Cade's emotions, his memories. 300 years of war and loss and terrible choices crashing into her consciousness like a tidal wave. She saw Clearwater burning, felt his anguish at choosing strategy over lives, saw his first intended mate, Lysa, beautiful and brilliant, dying on a mission he'd sent her on, saw centuries of soldiers following orders, trusting him, dying under his command, saw Marcus, younger, grieving beside a grave. 200 years ago, the woman he'd loved dying in childbirth on a diplomatic mission Marcus had insisted was safe. The weight of that failure still crushing him. The weight was crushing, unbearable. Elena's knees buckled. Cade caught her, held her as the bond settled, as her soul learned to carry the weight of his. When it finally stabilized, when Elena could breathe again, she looked up into Cade's eyes and saw her own reflection there, felt his awareness of her competence, her courage, her determination to save lives even when it meant poisoning enemies. He saw her completely, and she saw him. I'm sorry, Cade whispered, for all of it. I know, Elena said, and meant it. Because now she felt his regret, his exhaustion, his desperate hope that she could help him become something better than the monster war had made him. They stood together in the war room, newly bonded, feeling each other's presence in ways that would never fade. The mate mark on Elena's neck burned, already healing with the accelerated rate bonded wolves experienced. By morning, everyone would know. The bond would be visible, undeniable. Aldrich would have nothing to challenge. And Elena would spend the rest of her life feeling Cade's 300 years of ghosts. It was the most intimate violation she'd ever experienced. It was also, strangely, the safest she'd ever felt, because now she understood. The burden Cade carried, the impossible mathematics he calculated daily, the weight of command that crushed slowly over centuries. And he understood her. The healer who'd learned to make terrible choices, who'd poisoned 60 people to save 400. Who carried her father's death and her patient's suffering and the knowledge that she'd never be good enough to save everyone. We're quite a pair, Elena said. Her voice shook slightly. Yes, Cade agreed, we really are. The next morning, news of the completed bond spread through the fortress like wildfire. Soldiers who'd doubted, courtiers who'd whispered, everyone saw the mark, recognized what it meant. Aldrich, faced with undeniable proof, withdrew his challenge, publicly, gracefully. But Elena felt his resentment through the bond. Cade carried it like he carried everything else. Just another weight among thousands. Rowan found Elena in the medical wing, studied the mate mark with an expression Elena couldn't read. You actually did it, Rowan said, bonded with the king. Seemed like the best option. Rowan's laugh held no humor. The best option was not getting caught in a political trap that forced you to soul bond with a man you barely know. But yes, given the circumstances you were in, you chose well. She paused. Then quieter. He'll protect you now. with everything he has. The bond makes it impossible for him to do otherwise. And I'll feel every ghost he carries, Elena said. Yes. Rowan's expression gentled slightly. That's the price. Is it worth it? Elena touched the mark on her neck, felt Cade's presence in the back of her mind. Constant. Anchoring. Ask me in a year. You might not have a year, Rowan said. Vex knows about the depot raid by now. He'll retaliate, soon, and he'll target you specifically. Let him try. Elena straightened, met Rowan's eyes. I've survived everything else. I'll survive him, too. Rowan smiled, sharp and approving. Now you sound like a queen. The retaliation came 3 days after the bond completion. 3 days of Elena adjusting to the constant presence in her mind, of learning to distinguish Cade's emotions from her own, of discovering that marriage to a 300-year-old king meant sharing centuries of accumulated grief. Messengers arrived at dawn, breathless, terrified. Vex had attacked Riverbend, Elena's home village. The message was clear: return the healer or watch everything she loves burn. Cade refused immediately. We don't negotiate with terrorists. Those are my people, Elena said. Her voice was steady despite the panic clawing her chest. I grew up there. I know those families. And these are my soldiers. Cade gestured to the war room. The maps, the territories. I can't spare forces to defend one village. Not when Vex is probing 3 other fronts simultaneously. So we just let them burn? Cade's jaw worked. The bond let Elena feel his conflict, his rage at being forced into this position, his cold calculation of strategic priorities. If I commit troops to Riverbend, Vex will attack elsewhere. The eastern flank, maybe the mines. He's trying to force me into a mistake. And if you don't? Elena demanded. What message does that send to every other village in your territory? That the king protects the valuable but abandons the expendable? They're all expendable, Cade said. His voice was ice. That's the mathematics of war. I protect the maximum number possible. Riverbend is 600 people. The eastern mines support 6,000. The choice is obvious. Not to me. Elena felt rage building, felt the bond straining under the weight of their conflicting needs. Then you don't understand war. No, I understand that you've spent 300 years making the same choice. Strategy over people, numbers over names, and it's made you into exactly what Vex wants, a king who sees his people as statistics. The words hit like physical blows. Cade's expression went carefully blank, but through the bond, Elena felt the wound. Get out, he said quietly. Gladly. Elena stormed from the war room, felt Cade's anguish chasing her through the bond. Ignored it. She found Rowan in the training yard, training conscripts, Finn among them. I need your help, Elena said. Rowan took one look at her face, dismissed the trainees. What happened? Vex attacked Riverbend. Cade won't commit troops. Elena's hands clenched. I'm going anyway, with or without permission. That's desertion. Rowan's voice was careful. The king would have to execute you. The king can try. Elena met her eyes. Will you help me or not? Rowan studied her for a long moment, then sighed. How many soldiers do you think you can save with an unsanctioned rescue mission? All of them, Elena said, if we move fast enough. You're insane, Rowan smiled. I'm in. Within an hour, they'd assembled a strike team. 20 soldiers, all volunteers, all willing to risk court-martial to save a village their king had deemed expendable. Finn was first to volunteer, then Garrett, then others who'd served with Elena, who'd seen her competence, who trusted her judgment over strategic mathematics. They rode out at dusk, moving fast, pushing the horses hard. Through the bond, Elena felt Cade's awareness, his fury, his fear. She closed that connection, couldn't afford the distraction. Riverbend was 2 days' hard ride. They made it in 30 hours, arrived to find the village surrounded but not yet burning. Vex's forces had it under siege, waiting, using the villagers as bait, exactly as Elena had predicted. She studied the situation from a ridge above, counted enemy troops, assessed positions. 200 soldiers against her 20. The mathematics were suicide. Unless, she turned to Rowan, how much explosive powder did we bring? Rowan's eyes widened. Enough for breaching doors, maybe 30 pounds. Why? Elena smiled, sharp and dangerous. Because we're not fighting them, we're scaring them. She explained the plan. Rowan listened, nodded slowly. That's either brilliant or insane. Both, Elena agreed. Let's find out which. They worked through the night, setting charges, positioning teams, preparing the chaos. At dawn, Elena rode out alone, hands visible, unarmed, walked straight toward Vex's siege lines. Soldiers raised crossbows. Officers shouted warnings. Elena kept walking. Finally, a commander rode out to meet her. Young, confident. Exactly the type Vex would put in charge of a siege operation. "You're the healer," he said. "The king's mate." "I am." Elena's voice was steady. "I've come to negotiate." The commander smiled. "There's nothing to negotiate. You surrender. We release the village. Simple." Elena shook her head. "Counteroffer. You retreat. Now. Or I demonstrate exactly why the king values me." The commander laughed. "You're one woman, alone, unarmed. What can you possibly do?" Elena raised her hand. Behind her, hidden in the trees, Rowan triggered the explosives. 30 pounds of powder, distributed in 6 locations around the siege lines. Not enough to kill, but enough to create massive fireballs, smoke, chaos. The commander's horse reared, soldiers scattered. In the confusion, Elena's 20 burst from cover, hit 3 points simultaneously, creating the illusion of a much larger force. Vex's commander tried to rally his troops, but the chaos was complete. Fires everywhere, smoke obscuring vision, and in the center of it all, the king's mate, calm and deadly. The siege broke. Vex's forces retreated, routed by 20 soldiers and a healer who understood that sometimes victory wasn't about superior numbers. It was about superior audacity. Elena entered Riverbend to cheers. Her people, the families she'd grown up with, alive, safe. Because she'd refused to let mathematics determine their value. The ride back to Iron Mountain was silent. Elena knew what was coming. Cade would have to punish her. Desertion, insubordination, taking soldiers without authorization. The mathematics of military discipline were clear, but she'd saved 600 people. Some mathematics mattered more than others. They arrived at the fortress to find Cade waiting, expression unreadable. Through the bond, Elena felt nothing. He'd closed the connection completely. "Bring her to the war room," he ordered. The court-martial was brief. Cade presented the charges. Desertion, unsanctioned military action, theft of military resources, all capital offenses. Elena didn't defend herself, just stood straight, met his eyes. Finally, Cade spoke. "You disobeyed direct orders, took soldiers without permission, risked a massacre." "Yes," Elena said, "and you succeeded. Saved 600 civilians, routed an enemy force 10 times your size, with minimal casualties. Also yes." Cade's expression didn't change, but through the bond, suddenly open again, Elena felt his pride, his fury, his impossible love. "The sentence is this," Cade said. "You're promoted, officially. Joint command of all medical and tactical operations." The room went silent, because apparently, Cade continued, his voice dry, "I need someone willing to tell me when I'm being a strategic idiot and a moral coward." Elena stared. "That's not a punishment." "No. It's what should have happened from the beginning." Cade's expression finally cracked, showed the exhaustion underneath. "I was wrong. About Riverbend. About expendable villages. About thinking 300 years of war had taught me everything." He stood, moved toward her, the court watching in shocked silence. "You were right. Sometimes the mathematics that matter aren't about casualties. They're about what kind of kingdom is worth defending." He took her hand, in front of everyone, making the political statement clear. "Forgive me?" Elena felt tears sting her eyes. "For being 300 years old and still learning?" Cade smiled, tired but genuine, especially for that. Later, alone in quarters they now officially shared, Elena asked the question that had been burning since the court-martial. "Why didn't you execute me? Military discipline demands it." "Because the bond won't let me," Cade admitted. "Even thinking about harming you causes physical pain." He touched the mate mark on his own neck. Mirror to hers. "That's the cost of soul bonding. You're not just my mate. You're literally part of me now. And if I'd failed, if Riverbend had burned, then we'd both carry that ghost." Cade pulled her close. "Same as we'll carry every other choice we make." Elena rested her head against his chest, listened to his heartbeat, felt his 300 years of ghosts, and added her own, because that's what mates did. They carried weight together. The days following Riverbend settled into a new rhythm. Elena's promotion to Joint Command wasn't ceremonial. Cade meant it. War councils now included her voice equally. Strategic decisions required her input. The officers who'd seen her as the king's pet project now saw her as someone who'd earned authority through action. Marcus was the first to adapt. The morning after Elena's promotion, he found her reviewing supply routes in the war room. "You were right," he said without preamble. "About Riverbend. About some villages mattering more than strategic value suggests." Elena looked up from the maps. "I wasn't right. I was desperate. There's a difference." "No." Marcus shook his head. Desperation makes people reckless. You were calculated, audacious. But calculated, that's leadership. He moved to stand beside her at the table, pointed to 3 villages marked on the eastern border. These are next. If Vex retaliates again, it'll be here. We should preposition medical supplies, small defense forces, show we're protecting everyone, not just strategic assets. It was the first time Marcus had proposed strategy that prioritized people over positions. Elena felt something shift. This wasn't just acceptance of her authority. This was Marcus changing his fundamental approach. "Why the change?" she asked quietly. Marcus was silent for a moment. "Then, I told you I served Cade for 2 centuries. What I didn't tell you is why I stayed." Elena waited. 200 years ago, I lost my mate. Diplomatic mission. I insisted it was safe. She was pregnant. 3rd trimester. I thought the alliance mattered more than risk." His voice went flat. "She went into labor on the road, bled out before they could get her back, lost her and our child." "I'm sorry," Elena said, inadequate but genuine. "After that, I became what Cade needed. Cold, strategic, numbers over names, because feeling anything hurt too much." Marcus looked at her. "But watching you save Riverbend, watching you choose people over strategy and succeed, it reminded me that the numbers are people, that sometimes the cold calculations miss what actually matters." The admission hung between them, raw, honest. "Thank you for telling me," Elena said. Marcus nodded. Then, businesslike again, "We need to discuss the winter offensive. It's delayed, not canceled. Vex will regroup. Probably 3 to 4 weeks. We need a strategy that doesn't rely on him making mistakes." They spent the next 2 hours planning. Not just military strategy, logistics, medical preparation, civilian evacuation routes, the kind of comprehensive planning that assumed war would touch everyone, and everyone deserved protection. Cade found them there at midday, saw the maps covered with notations, supply caches marked, evacuation plans detailed. "You're planning for the offensive," he said. "We're planning to protect people during the offensive," Elena corrected. "There's a difference." Cade studied the maps, saw the shift in approach. The resources allocated not just to winning battles, but to minimizing civilian casualties, to protecting the vulnerable. Through the bond, Elena felt his surprise, his approval, his relief that maybe, finally, he didn't have to carry the burden of caring alone. "This will cost more," he said. "Resources, manpower, time." "Yes," Marcus agreed, "but it'll also reduce the resentment. Villages seeing we protect them fight harder when attacked, surrender less easily. Long term, it's more effective than ruling through fear." Cade looked at Marcus, really looked. Saw the change there, the thawing of 2 centuries of ice. "When did you become an optimist?" he asked. "When I stopped being terrified of hope," Marcus said simply. The 3 of them stood around the war table. King, queen, second. Building something different than what had come before. Not perfect, not easy, but better. The training yard became Elena's second home. Rowan insisted on daily sessions. Not just combat, strategy, leadership. How to command soldiers who'd seen you as civilian weeks ago. One afternoon, Garrett approached after a particularly brutal sparring session. Elena was on the ground, again, bruised, exhausted. "You're getting better," he said, offered his hand. Elena took it. "Let him pull her up. I'm getting beaten less quickly. That's not the same as better. It is when you're fighting opponents with decades of experience." Garrett's scarred face actually smiled. "You lasted 4 minutes today. First week you lasted 30 seconds. Progress," Elena said dryly. "More than progress." Garrett gestured to the other soldiers training nearby. "You've got their respect now. Not because you're the king's mate, because you saved Riverbend, because you fight in training even though you're joint command and could delegate." Elena looked around the yard, saw soldiers who weeks ago had whispered about her. Now they nodded as she passed, offered advice during drills, included her in the dark humor that bonded warriors. "I don't feel like I've earned it," she admitted. "No one ever does," Garrett said. "That's how you know it's real." That night, Elena joined Cade on the balcony outside their quarters. The fortress sprawled below them, torches lighting training yards, guards patrolling walls, the organized chaos of an army preparing for war. Through the bond, she felt Cade's contentment, rare, precious. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I made the right choice," Cade said, "conscripting you, even if the reasons were wrong at the time." Elena leaned against him. "The choice worked out. That doesn't make it right." "No, but it makes it bearable." Cade's arm wrapped around her shoulders. I've made a lot of wrong choices for right reasons. Few of them worked out this well. The bond let Elena feel the weight behind those words. Centuries of decisions, some successful, many not, all carried. Tell me about Lysa, she said quietly. Cade was silent for a long moment. Then, she was the first person I sent on a suicide mission. Brilliant tactician, only one capable of destroying Vex's ancestors' fortress. I told myself it was necessary, that the strategic value justified the risk. And after, I spent 50 years wondering if I could have found another way, if I'd been willing to accept higher casualties. More time, different strategy. He paused. I never bonded again. Didn't trust myself not to use someone else's life as a strategic resource. Until me, Elena said. Until you. And even then, I told myself it was just practical, just conscription, just political cover. Cade's voice roughened. Took you forcing the mate bond to make me admit I wanted this. Wanted you. Not as a resource. As a partner. Through the bond, Elena felt the truth of it. The fear he'd carried, the walls he'd built, the slow crumbling of those defenses. I'm glad I forced your hand, she said. So am I. They stood together watching the fortress prepare for war. Two people learning to share weight that had been carried alone too long. The intelligence reports came a week later. Vex was moving. Not massing for offensive, pulling back, consolidating territory. Cade called emergency council. Elena and Marcus joined him in the war room. Maps spread. Flags repositioned to show Vex's new troop placements. He's retreating, Marcus said, moving forces to defensive positions. Or preparing to negotiate, Elena offered. The depot raid crippled his offensive capability. Riverbend showed, we'll defend villages he uses as leverage. He's losing, and he knows it. Cade studied the maps. Running scenarios. What would you offer? If he asked to negotiate? Elena considered. Alliance. Access to our trade networks. Protection for his people. In exchange for integration of forces. End of raiding. That's appeasement, Marcus said. But his tone was thoughtful rather than dismissive. Though I admit, if he's genuinely desperate enough, it might work. It's not appeasement if we require accountability, Cade said slowly. War Crimes Tribunal. Public sentencing. Serve under our command for years. Prove through action that the alliance is real. Through the bond, Elena felt Cade working through the mathematics. Cost of continued war versus cost of integration. The possibilities opening. Do we wait for him to ask, or do we offer? She questioned. We wait, Cade decided. If he's desperate, he'll come to us. If we offer first, he'll see weakness and demand more. Marcus nodded agreement, then added, but we prepare. Have terms ready, conditions clear. So when he does ask, we respond with strength, not scrambling. They spent the next hours drafting terms. Harsh but fair, designed to hold Vex accountable while offering genuine path to peace. It felt surreal, planning for peace after weeks of war. But the possibility was there. Real, tangible, worth building. As councils ended and officers dispersed, Marcus lingered. I owe you both an apology, he said. For 2 centuries I've been Cade's shield, protecting him from hope because hope hurt too much. But you've shown me that hope is what makes this worth it, what makes the weight bearable. You don't owe us an apology, Cade said. You kept me alive when I wanted to quit. That's worth more than any strategic victory. Marcus's expression softened. Then I'll say thank you instead, for reminding me who I wanted to be, before grief made me cold. Elena felt the bond pulse with Cade's emotion. Pride in Marcus, gratitude, hope that maybe all the ghosts they carried could be laid to rest, not forgotten, but transformed into something that drove them toward better choices. That night, lying in bed, Elena felt Cade's arms around her and the bond humming with contentment. 3 weeks ago I was a village healer, she said into the darkness. Now I'm joint command, planning strategy with kings. 3 weeks ago I was alone, Cade replied. Now I have you, the bond, a reason to build peace instead of just managing war. Do you think it'll last, the peace we're trying to build? I think we'll fight for it, Cade said. Same as we fight for everything worth having. And that gives it better odds than most things I've tried to build. Elena felt the truth of it through the bond. Not certainty, not guarantee, just commitment. To try, to build, to choose peace even when war was easier. It was enough, more than enough. It was hope. And hope, Elena was learning, was the rarest strategic resource of all. The neutral ground was a clearing in the borderlands, ancient territory claimed by neither side. Trees older than Cade surrounded the space, witnesses to centuries of failed negotiations and broken treaties. Elena stood beside her mate, feeling the weight of history pressing down like physical force. Vex arrived with the rising sun. Elena's first thought was how young he looked. Not ancient like Cade, not weathered by centuries. Just a man in his prime, maybe 60 years old, carrying the kind of exhaustion that came from fighting wars you couldn't win but couldn't afford to lose. He brought 10 guards. Cade had brought the same. Marcus stood at Cade's left, Rowan at his right. Elena slightly behind, positioned as advisor rather than combatant, exactly as they'd planned. Vex's eyes found Elena immediately, studied her with the focused intensity of a strategist assessing an unexpected piece on the board. "So you're the healer who's been dismantling my supply lines," he said. His voice was younger than Elena expected, less gravelly, more human. "And you're the raider who's been burning villages," Elena replied, keeping her tone neutral, stating facts rather than accusations. Vex's mouth quirked, not quite a smile. "Fair enough." Cade stepped forward, breaking the assessment. "You requested negotiation. We're here. Talk." Vex shifted his attention to Cade. The two alphas studied each other. Centuries of wolf instinct calculating dominance, threat, capability. Elena felt Cade's awareness through the bond. Cold, analytical, no rage, just professional evaluation. "I'm losing," Vex said bluntly. "Your guerrilla tactics are bleeding my forces faster than I can resupply. My winter offensive is stalled. My troops are hungry. In 3 months, maybe 4, I won't have the strength to hold my own territories." "So you're surrendering," Marcus said, voice hard. "No." Vex's eyes flashed. "I'm negotiating before the situation becomes desperate enough that I have to do something catastrophic." The honesty surprised Elena. Most commanders would posture, pretend strength. Vex was laying his weakness on the table like a surgical instrument. "What do you want?" Cade asked. "Security," Vex said. "For my people. My pack. We've been pushed from territory to territory for 15 years. Every time we settle, someone stronger comes and takes what we've built. I'm tired of running." "So you decided to become the one doing the pushing," Elena said quietly. Vex looked at her, really looked, seeing past the healer to the strategist underneath. "Yes, better to be the wolf than the deer. Except now you're discovering that being the wolf just means different predators," Elena continued. "Larger territories to defend, more enemies, more resources needed. It's not sustainable." "No," Vex agreed. "It's not, which is why I'm here." Cade's expression didn't change, but through the bond, Elena felt his surprise, his recalculation. He'd expected threats, demands, not this raw admission of failure. "What are you proposing?" Cade asked. "Alliance," Vex said. "Access to your trade networks, protection under your territories. In exchange, I stop raiding. My forces integrate with yours. My expertise in asymmetric warfare becomes yours." The offer hung in the air. Too good, too convenient. "You've killed hundreds of my people," Marcus said. "Burned villages, poisoned wells. And now you want alliance?" "Yes," Vex said simply. "Because the alternative is my people starving. And when people starve, they do desperate things. Things that make the last 3 months look gentle." It was a threat wrapped in honesty. Vex was giving them a choice. Peace with a former enemy, or war with someone who had nothing left to lose. Cade was silent, thinking, calculating. Through the bond, Elena felt him running scenarios, weighing options. Finally he spoke. "If we agree to this, if we integrate your forces, how do I know you won't turn on us the moment you've recovered strength?" "You don't," Vex said. "Same way I don't know you won't use integration as an excuse to execute my leadership and scatter my pack. We're both gambling." "Trust built on mutual vulnerability," Elena said. "Both of you holding knives, both of you choosing not to use them." Vex's eyes found hers again. "Exactly." He looked back at Cade. "Your mate understands power dynamics. She understands that war is expensive," Cade said, "and that sometimes the cost of victory is higher than the cost of peace." "So you'll consider it?" Vex asked. Cade shook his head. "No, I'll accept it, with conditions." The clearing went still. Vex's guards tensed. Cade's remained calm, waiting for their king's terms. "First condition," Cade said. "You submit to war crimes tribunal. Every village burned, every civilian killed. Public accounting, public sentencing." Vex's jaw tightened. "You want me to confess to crimes before my own people?" "I want accountability," Cade said. Without it, the alliance is fiction. My people need to see justice. And if the tribunal sentences me to death, then you die, Cade said bluntly. And your second takes command of the integrated forces. The alliance continues. Vex studied Cade's face, looking for deception, found only brutal honesty. Second condition, Cade continued. Your forces undergo retraining, Rowan's methods. No more civilian targeting, no more terror tactics. You learn to fight as soldiers, not raiders. That will take months, Vex said. Yes. Cade's tone allowed no argument. Third condition. You personally serve under my command for 5 years. Minimum. Learn how to build instead of destroy. Prove the alliance is real. The conditions were harsh, designed to humiliate, to dominate. Everything Vex had been fighting against. Through the bond, Elena felt Cade's calculation. He was testing, seeing if Vex's desperation was genuine or performance. Vex was quiet for long minutes. His guards watched, waiting for his decision. Finally, Vex nodded. I accept all 3 conditions. Just like that? Marcus asked, suspicion thick in his voice. Just like that, Vex confirmed. Because the alternative is watching my people die slowly. And I'm tired of burying children. The raw pain in his voice silenced objections. This wasn't performance. This was a man at the end of his options, choosing survival over pride. We'll need guarantees, Marcus said. Hostages, inspections. You'll have them, Vex agreed. Take my second as hostage. Inspect our camps weekly. Do whatever you need to feel secure. Cade extended his hand. A human gesture, not a wolf dominance display. When this is over, when the 5 years are done, you'll be a free alpha again, with territory and protection and trade. That's my word. Vex took the offered hand, shook. And if I betray this trust? Then I'll kill you myself, Cade said. But I don't think you will, because you're not stupid, and peace is more valuable than revenge. The handshake held, 2 alphas, former enemies, choosing gamble over certainty. Elena felt something shift through the bond. Not quite hope, not quite relief, but possibility. The first real possibility of ending this war without complete destruction. The journey back to Iron Mountain was silent. Cade rode beside Elena, close enough that their legs occasionally brushed. Through the bond, she felt him processing, calculating consequences. You took a massive risk, Marcus said when they stopped to water horses. Trusting Vex, offering alliance. Yes, Cade agreed. He could be lying, could be buying time to regroup. He could be. Cade looked at Elena. What do you think? Elena remembered Vex's eyes, the exhaustion there, the desperation wrapped in strategy. I think he's genuine, she said. I think he's been fighting so long he's forgotten why he started, and he wants to stop. Even if he's genuine now, what about in a year? In 5? Marcus pressed. When he's recovered strength. Then we'll have 5 years of building trust, Elena said. Of his people integrating with ours. Of shared experiences and mixed loyalties. It's harder to betray people you've bled beside. Marcus didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue further. They reached Iron Mountain at dusk. News of the alliance spread faster than Elena expected. Reactions were mixed. Some soldiers celebrated the end of fighting. Others wanted blood, wanted Vex executed, wanted revenge for fallen comrades. The War Council that night was brutal. Officers shouting, accusations flying. Cade sat at the head of the table. Let them vent. Let the rage and grief pour out. Finally, when the shouting died to exhausted murmurs, he spoke. I understand your anger. Some of you lost friends, family, packmates. You want Vex to suffer, to pay with his life for what he's taken. Heads nodded, muttered agreements. But revenge is expensive, Cade continued. It costs lives, resources, time. We can spend the next year hunting Vex to extinction, lose hundreds more soldiers doing it. Or we can accept his surrender, integrate his forces, and use the combined strength to build something that lasts. That's asking us to forgive, an officer said, voice tight with grief. No, Elena spoke up. It's asking you to choose the future over the past. Vex will face tribunal, will answer for his crimes, but executing him won't bring back the dead. It'll just add to the count. And if he betrays us, the officer demanded, if he uses this alliance to strike when we're vulnerable, then we kill him and everyone who follows him, Cade said flatly. But until that happens, until we have evidence of betrayal, we honor the agreement, because my word means something, even given to enemies. The room slowly settled. Not agreement, not forgiveness, but acceptance. The kind that came from trusting a leader who'd kept them alive through worse. The tribunal was scheduled for 3 days later. Public. broadcast to every territory. Vex would stand trial for war crimes before the people he'd terrorized. Elena spent those 3 days preparing, not just medically, emotionally, because she'd have to sit through testimony, hear about villages burning, children dying, all the consequences of Vex's desperate strategy. Rowan found her the night before the tribunal, found her in the medical wing, organizing supplies with mechanical precision, trying not to think about tomorrow. "You don't have to attend," Rowan said. "You're not required." "I am," Elena replied. "I'm Joint Command. My presence matters." Rowan sat on a supply crate, studied Elena with those sharp eyes. "You're afraid you'll hate him, after hearing what he's done." "I'm afraid I won't," Elena admitted. "I'm afraid I'll see the desperation behind the choices, understand the mathematics, and that understanding will feel like betrayal of the victims." Rowan nodded slowly. "That's the burden of leadership. Seeing all sides. Understanding doesn't mean forgiving. Just means you're trying to prevent the next cycle. What if the alliance fails? What if Vex does betray us? Then we fight," Rowan said simply. "Same as we would have anyway. But at least we tried peace first." The tribunal began at dawn. Vex stood in the center of the Great Hall. No restraints, no guards, just a man facing judgment. The testimonies started, village leaders describing raids, survivors of attacks, families of the dead, hour after hour of suffering laid bare. Vex listened to all of it, didn't defend, didn't excuse, just stood and absorbed the weight of what his choices had caused. Elena watched his face, saw grief there, genuine remorse, not the performance of a manipulator, the exhaustion of someone drowning in consequences. When the testimonies finished, Cade stood. As presiding judge, he had final say on sentencing. "Vex Blackridge, you stand accused of 17 counts of civilian massacre, 42 counts of property destruction, 67 counts of unlawful combat. How do you plead?" "Guilty," Vex said. His voice was steady. "All charges." The room erupted. Shock, rage, confusion. Guilty pleas were supposed to come with explanations, justifications. Vex offered none. Cade waited for silence, then continued. "Do you have anything to say before sentencing?" Vex looked around the hall, at the faces of people he'd hurt, families he'd destroyed. "Yes, I'm sorry. It's inadequate. It changes nothing, but I am sorry." The silence was deafening. "The tribunal finds you guilty," Cade said. "Sentence is as follows. You will serve under my direct command for 10 years. Not 5. 10. You will personally oversee rebuilding every village you destroyed. You will meet with every family that lost someone to your actions. You will carry the weight of what you've done, and you will prove through action that peace is possible." It was a sentence worse than death for some. Living with guilt, facing victims daily, building instead of destroying. Vex bowed his head. "Accepted." "But," Cade continued, "if you complete these 10 years, if you prove the alliance real, you'll be granted full alpha status, territory of your own, protection, a chance to build something that doesn't require burning others." The offer was unexpected, cruel in its mercy. 10 years of penance for a lifetime of security. "Do you accept?" Cade asked. "I accept," Vex said. The alliance was sealed, not in celebration, not in joy, but in grim acceptance that sometimes peace required swallowing pride and carrying weight that never got lighter. The weeks that followed were tense. Vex's forces integrated slowly, carefully, old enemies training together, eating together, learning to trust through shared exhaustion. There were fights, inevitable, old grievances flaring. But Rowan handled each incident with brutal efficiency. Fighting was permitted, killing was not. Anyone who couldn't control themselves was removed from both forces. Slowly, grudgingly, the integration worked. But it wasn't smooth. Elena found herself mediating disputes daily. A soldier from Cade's forces refused to train beside the man who'd burned his village. 2 of Vex's former raiders got into a knife fight over rations. An officer tried to establish separate sleeping quarters. Segregation dressed as practicality. Elena shut it down immediately. "The quarters stay mixed," she said, standing in the barracks, facing down an officer twice her age. "That's non-negotiable." "With respect, my queen," the officer said, "tensions are high. Keeping them separated reduces conflict." "No, it delays conflict." Elena's voice was firm. "They need to learn to live together, sleep in the same rooms, share the same food, become packmates, not just allies of convenience." The officer looked to Cade for support. Found none. "The queen has spoken," Cade said. "Quarters stay mixed. Anyone who can't handle that can request transfer to border patrols. Alone." The policy held. Within weeks, Elena noticed small changes: soldiers sharing watches, trading stories during downtime, the slow erosion of us versus them. But the real test came 3 weeks after integration began. A patrol went out. Mixed unit. 5 of Cade's soldiers, 5 of Vex's former forces. Routine border check. They ran into raiders, not organized, just bandits taking advantage of the chaos, 20 against 10. The patrol fought together, covered each other. One of Vex's former raiders took an arrow meant for Cade's lieutenant, saved his life. They limped back to the fortress, wounded, exhausted, but bound in ways that training couldn't create. Elena treated them in the medical wing, watched as the lieutenant sat beside the man who'd saved him, held his hand while Elena stitched the wound. "Thank you," the lieutenant said, voice rough. The former raider, young, barely 20, looked embarrassed. "Just doing my job." "You did more than your job. You could have let me die, erased one more enemy." "You're not my enemy anymore." The young man's voice was certain. "You're my squad leader." That moment, Elena realized, was worth more than 100 training exercises. Shared combat, shared survival, the fastest way to forge bonds. She made a note to discuss with Rowan. More joint patrols, more situations where old enemies had to trust each other or die. Not manufactured danger, but real missions, real stakes, real opportunities to become more than reluctant allies. Elena spent her days treating injuries from integration clashes, and her nights helping Vex organize village rebuilding. It was strange, working beside the man who'd caused so much destruction, but she saw his commitment, his genuine attempt at redemption. The first village they rebuilt together was Clearwater, the site of Vex's worst massacre, 370 dead. The village Cade had chosen not to defend. Vex insisted on going personally, leading the reconstruction, facing survivors. Elena accompanied him, partly as support, partly to witness, partly because someone needed to mediate if rage overwhelmed practicality. The survivors were fewer than expected. Most had scattered, found new homes, new lives, but 40 remained, clinging to land their families had held for generations. The village elder, a woman named Margaret with white hair and hands gnarled by work, met them at the ruins of the town square. "You're the one who burned us," she said to Vex, not a question. "Yes," Vex said, his voice steady despite the pain Elena felt radiating from him. "And now you're here to rebuild?" Margaret's tone was impossible to read. Not angry, not grateful, just flat. "Why?" "Because I can't give you back what I took, but I can give you something to build on." Vex gestured to the wagons. "Materials, workers, money, whatever you need." Margaret studied him for a long moment. Then, "We don't want your guilt. We want homes. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Then start with the schoolhouse. The children need education more than we need your apologies." It was the most practical response to war crimes Elena had ever witnessed. Not forgiveness, not revenge. Just focus on what mattered. The future. They spent 2 weeks in Clearwater. Vex worked alongside survivors, hauling timber, mixing mortar. His hands blistered and bleeding by day 3. He didn't complain, didn't slow. Elena established a medical station, treated workers, survivors, found herself delivering a baby for one of Margaret's granddaughters, new life in a place that had seen so much death. On the final day, as they prepared to leave, Margaret approached Vex. "You're different than I expected," she said. "How so?" "I expected a monster." She looked at his blistered hands, the exhaustion in his face. "But you're just a man who made terrible choices, same as any of us would, pushed far enough. That doesn't excuse what I did." "No, but it makes it possible to live beside you." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "Come back when the schoolhouse needs repairs. The children should see that even people who do terrible things can choose differently." It was the closest thing to forgiveness Vex would get, and Elena saw through his careful mask. It meant everything. More refugees arrived. Word had spread about the alliance, about territories that welcomed displaced wolves instead of turning them away. Elena established screening protocols, interviews, background checks, medical assessments, not to exclude arbitrarily, but to identify threats, to protect what they'd built. Most passed, were welcomed, integrated into the growing territories. But some didn't. One afternoon, 4 months after the alliance, Elena interviewed a refugee alpha named Theron. Male, mid-40s, claimed his pack had been destroyed by territorial disputes. Something about his story didn't align. Details that shifted between tellings, evasions wrapped in trauma narratives. Elena consulted with Marcus. They dug deeper, found evidence Theron hadn't fled disaster. He'd caused it, killed his own alpha, seized power, been overthrown by his own pack. He was dangerous, a predator pretending to be prey. The council debate was intense. Some argued for mercy, second chances. Others demanded immediate exile, execution even. Elena proposed a third option. Supervised integration, she said. Close monitoring, restricted movements, but a genuine chance to reform. If he succeeds, he proves redemption is possible. If he fails, we remove him. But we try first. That's naive, an officer argued. He'll betray us first chance he gets. Maybe, Elena agreed. But if we execute everyone with a violent past, we'd have to start with Vex, and Cade, and half the officers in this room. The question isn't whether someone has done terrible things. It's whether they're committed to doing better. The policy passed, barely. Theron was accepted under strict conditions. 6 months later, he was still there, working, training, no incidents, no betrayals. Just a man slowly learning that strength didn't require domination. Not every story ended that way. Some refugees couldn't adapt. Some betrayed trust, were exiled or imprisoned. But enough succeeded. Enough found new lives, built new loyalties, proved that cycles could break. Elena's medical academy graduated its second class, 40 new surgeons this time, trained in battlefield medicine and civilian care. They dispersed to villages throughout the territories, raising standards everywhere. One of the graduates was from Vex's former forces, a young woman named Lissa who'd learned basic field medicine during years of raids. Elena had personally mentored her, watched her transform from hesitant to confident. On graduation day, Lissa approached Elena privately. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for seeing past what I was, for teaching me what I could become." "You did the work," Elena replied. "I just provided the opportunity. In my old life, I set bones so raiders could keep fighting, stitched wounds so they could burn more villages." Lissa's voice was quiet. "Now I save lives, actually save them. It feels like redemption." "It is redemption." Elena touched her shoulder. "You're proof that people can change, that past doesn't determine future." Lissa smiled, tired but genuine, then left to take her posting in a village that had been burned twice, going to heal the people her former companions had hurt. That evening, Elena sat with Cade reviewing integration reports, metrics on conflict resolution, training completion rates, economic indicators showing growth. The numbers were good, better than good. The alliance was working. But numbers never captured the full story. "Do you ever regret it?" Elena asked, offering alliance instead of crushing Vex. "Every day," Cade said, then added, "and not at all." Elena waited for elaboration. "I regret the risk," Cade explained, "the vulnerability, the possibility of catastrophic betrayal. But I don't regret building something better than what I had, alone, cold, spending centuries managing decline instead of creating growth." Through the bond, Elena felt the truth of it. Cade had spent so long preventing disaster that he'd forgotten how to build success. The alliance forced him to try, to risk, to hope. "What changed?" Elena asked. "What made you willing to take that risk?" "You," Cade said simply. "Watching you choose Riverbend over orders, seeing you build bridges instead of walls. You reminded me that strength isn't just endurance, it's creation." Elena felt warmth spread through her chest, not just her emotion. Cade's too, shared through the bond. "We're better together," she said. It had become their phrase, their truth. "Yes," Cade agreed, "we really are." One night, 3 weeks after the tribunal, Vex found Elena in her medical wing. Late. Everyone else gone. "May I speak with you?" he asked. Formal. Careful. Elena gestured to a chair. He sat. Looked exhausted, older than his 60 years. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for seeing past the monster." "I see the monster," Elena corrected. "I just also see the person underneath." Vex smiled. Tired. "You're the reason the king accepted alliance. He told me. Said you convinced him desperation makes people dangerous, but it also makes them honest." "I convinced him that ending the war was worth the risk," Elena said. "Not that you deserved forgiveness." "I don't deserve it," Vex agreed, "but I'm grateful anyway." They sat in silence. Then Elena asked the question that had been bothering her since the negotiation. "Why did you really surrender? You could have kept fighting, made us bleed for every inch." "Because I'm tired," Vex said simply. "Tired of watching people die for my mistakes. Tired of making choices that keep me awake at night. I've been fighting for 15 years. I wanted to see if peace felt different. Does it? I don't know yet. Vex looked at his hands, scarred from combat. Ask me in 10 years. Fair enough. After Vex left, Elena sat alone in the medical wing. Thought about the mathematics of war, how they looked different from this side of conflict, when enemies became allies, when monsters revealed themselves as broken people trying to survive. Cade found her there an hour later, sat beside her without speaking, just presence, comfort. Through the bond, Elena felt his exhaustion, his cautious hope, his fear that the alliance would fail and prove Marcus right. It's working, she told him, the integration. Slowly, but it's working. For now, Cade said. What about in 6 months? A year? Then we deal with it then, Elena said. We can't live in fear of potential betrayal. Just have to build trust stronger than suspicion. Cade pulled her close. You're optimistic. I'm realistic. Elena rested against him. Trust isn't magic. It's daily choices. We keep choosing peace. Eventually, it becomes habit. And if it doesn't, then we fight, same as always. But at least we tried something different first. 6 months passed. The integration continued. Vex proved himself through action, rebuilt villages, met with victims, trained soldiers in tactics that didn't target civilians, slowly earned grudging respect. Marcus remained skeptical, but even he couldn't deny the alliance was functional. Combined forces were stronger, territory more secure, trade networks expanding, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, Marcus himself changed. Elena noticed it in small ways, how he'd pause before making decisions, consider civilian impact, factor in human cost beyond strategic value. One evening, he approached Elena privately. I need advice, he said. Unusual for Marcus to ask for help. Elena set down her medical notes. About what? There's a refugee alpha, Sarah. She's requesting extended sanctuary, but her background check shows she led resistance that killed civilians. Collateral damage, she claims, but civilians nonetheless. What do you think? Elena asked. Marcus's jaw worked. 6 months ago, I'd have refused immediately. Too risky. But now, I don't know. She seems genuine. Her people loyal. But the deaths. So you're asking if people can change, Elena said. I'm asking if I'm being naive, if hope is making me weak. Elena studied him, saw the internal war playing out. 2 centuries of cold calculations versus 6 months of watching redemption be possible. Meet with her, Elena said. Directly. Look her in the eyes. Trust your instincts, not just your fear. What if my instincts are wrong? Then we deal with consequences, same as we deal with any choice. But Marcus, living in constant fear of betrayal, is its own prison. Eventually, you have to decide if building something better is worth the risk. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. Thank you. 2 weeks later, Elena noticed Marcus spending time with Sarah. Conversations, shared meals, the slow development of something Elena recognized. Connection. The kind that came from 2 people who'd lost much and were cautiously hoping for more. She didn't interfere, just watched, pleased. Marcus deserved peace after 2 centuries of grief. One morning, 9 months after the alliance, Elena woke feeling different. Off, nauseous, her body strange. She knew immediately what it meant, had treated enough pregnant women to recognize the signs. She was carrying Cade's child. The realization hit like a physical blow. Joy, terror, overwhelming responsibility. Through the bond, she felt Cade wake, felt his instant awareness of her emotional turbulence. What's wrong? He asked, already moving toward her. I'm pregnant, Elena said, just blurted it out. Cade went very still, then so quietly she almost missed it. Are you certain? Yes. Elena's medical training was screaming details. First trimester, maybe 6 weeks. All the symptoms aligned. Cade's hands were shaking when he pulled her close. 300 years. And I never thought I'd have another child. Another? Elena pulled back, looked at him. Through the bond, memories flooded. Cade's first son, born 2 centuries ago, died in childhood from fever. Elena could have treated easily. The grief that had broken something in Cade made him cold, distant, unable to risk that pain again. I'm sorry, Elena whispered. I didn't know. I don't talk about it. Cade's voice was rough. It was too long ago, too painful. But now we have a chance again, Elena said. If you want this. Want it? Cade's laugh was broken. I'm terrified of it, of losing another child, of failing again. You won't fail, Elena said firmly, because you have me, and I'm not dying in childbirth. I'm too stubborn. The comment startled a real laugh from Cade. Yes, you really are. They told Marcus first. Watched his expression cycle through shock, concern, and finally cautious happiness. Congratulations, he said. Meant it. Then quieter. This changes strategic calculations. You'll need additional protection. I'll need to continue working, Elena corrected. Pregnancy isn't a disease. Marcus's expression said he wanted to argue, but he'd learned better over the past months. You'll work, with triple the guard detail. Elena sighed, knew this was the compromise. Fine. The pregnancy became public knowledge within days. Reactions were mixed. Some celebrated, others worried. Vex's forces saw it as proof of stability. Old Guard saw it as vulnerability. Rowan increased combat training, insisted Elena maintain conditioning appropriate for pregnancy, modified techniques, but kept her sharp. You're carrying the future king or queen, Rowan said during a training session. That child needs a mother who can fight if necessary. Elena, 6 months pregnant and increasingly uncomfortable, threw a practice knife at the target. Hit center mass. I'm a healer, not a warrior. You're both, Rowan said. Same as your mate and queen and strategist and mother. You hold all of it together. That's leadership. The phrase stuck with Elena, became a mantra through the difficult final months, when her body ached, when duties piled up, when the fear of labor crept in during quiet moments. You hold all of it together. Labor began on a cold winter morning, 18 months after Elena had been conscripted, 12 months after alliance with Vex, 9 months after discovering the pregnancy. Elena's medical training meant she knew exactly what was happening, knew the stages, the risks, the timeline. It didn't make the pain less intense. Cade stayed with her through all of it, held her hand, let her squeeze until bones ground together, felt every contraction through the bond. Thomas, the older surgeon, attended the birth, calm, experienced, reassuring. You're doing perfectly, he told Elena during a particularly brutal contraction. First babies take time. Be patient. Patience is difficult when it feels like your body is tearing apart, Elena gasped. Yes, Thomas agreed, but you're strong. You'll manage. 8 hours of labor, then 10, 12. Elena's exhaustion was overwhelming, but she kept pushing, kept fighting, because her child deserved a mother who didn't quit. Finally, mercifully, a cry split the air, thin, angry, perfect. It's a girl, Thomas said, holding up a tiny, furious infant, healthy, strong lungs. Elena started crying, relief, joy, exhaustion, all mixed together. Cade took their daughter with shaking hands, looked down at the tiny face, and Elena felt through the bond what she'd suspected. He'd been terrified, absolutely certain something would go wrong, that history would repeat. But it hadn't. Their daughter was alive, breathing, perfect. What do we name her? Elena asked, voice hoarse from screaming. Cade looked at Elena, then at their daughter. Lyra, he said, after my mother. The Omega who taught me strength could be gentle. Lyra, Elena repeated, testing the name. It fits. The fortress celebrated the birth, not just Cade's forces, Vex's integrated soldiers too, because this child represented the future, proof that enemies could become allies, that peace could build something new. Elena recovered slowly. Childbirth was brutal even with medical knowledge, but she healed, learned to function on fragmented sleep, learned to balance motherhood with command responsibilities. It was harder than any battlefield, more exhausting than any campaign, but also more rewarding. 3 months after Lyra's birth, Elena was back in the medical wing, not full-time, but enough to maintain skills, to train new surgeons, to keep the systems running. She was treating a soldier's wound when Vex appeared, face grim. We have a problem, he said. Elena finished stitching, bandaged, then followed Vex to the war room. Cade was already there, studying maps with the focused intensity that meant crisis. What happened? Elena asked. One of my former lieutenants, Vex said, refused integration, gathered loyalists, declared himself the true leader. He gestured to the map. He's raiding villages on the southern border, using my old tactics. How many followers? Cade asked. Maybe 200. Vex's jaw was tight, enough to cause serious damage. This is what I warned about, Marcus said, quietly but firmly. Alliance creates fractures, weaknesses. This is what happens in any integration, Elena countered. Some resist change. The question is how we respond. We hunt them down, Cade said. Eliminate the threat. No, Elena said. All eyes turned to her. If we hunt them, they become martyrs, proof that the alliance was a trap, that Vex betrayed his people. What do you suggest? Vex asked. You go, Elena said, with a small team. Talk to your former lieutenant. Show him the alternative. Give him a chance to choose integration willingly. And if he refuses, Marcus demanded, then you capture him, Elena said. Bring him to trial, same as Vex faced. Give him the choice, penance or exile. It's risky, Cade said, sending Vex into a hostile situation. Everything's risky, Elena replied, but this way preserves the alliance, shows that fractures can heal. Vex was quiet, then nodded. I'll do it. This is my responsibility, my failure to integrate fully. The mission took a week. Vex traveled with 10 soldiers, mixed force, old loyalists and new alliance members. Symbolic. They found the lieutenant holed up in a fortified camp, preparing for what he thought would be civil war. Vex walked in alone, unarmed, sat across from the man who'd served under him for a decade. I'm not here to fight you, Vex said. I'm here to ask why you're doing this. The lieutenant stared. Because you betrayed us, bowed to the king, became his lapdog. I ended a war we couldn't win, Vex corrected. Saved our people from starvation, gave them security. At the cost of our pride. Yes, Vex agreed. At that cost. Because pride doesn't feed children, doesn't heal wounds, doesn't build futures. The conversation lasted hours. Vex laying out the mathematics, the reality, the choice between survival and honor when you couldn't have both. Finally, the lieutenant spoke. If I integrate, if I accept this, what happens to me? You face tribunal, Vex said. Same as I did. Answer for the raids you've done in the past week. Accept penance. Prove through action that you're committed to peace. And if I refuse, then you exile. Leave the territories. Build somewhere else if you can. The lieutenant was quiet for a long time. Then, I'll take the tribunal. The integration wasn't perfect. Some of the lieutenant's followers refused, chose exile, but most stayed, accepted the new reality. It was a small victory, but it mattered. Proved the alliance could withstand fractures, could heal. When Vex returned, Elena met him at the gates, studied his exhausted face. Thank you, she said, for choosing the hard path. It's the only path that works, Vex replied. I'm learning that, slowly. On the anniversary of Vex's surrender, 2 years after Alliance, Cade called a gathering. Every alpha, every representative, formal ceremony. Elena stood beside him, Lyra in her arms, Vex on Cade's other side, Marcus behind, Rowan flanking, the leadership that had built this peace. Cade spoke, voice carrying to every corner of the packed hall. 2 years ago, we faced a choice, war to extinction, or alliance with enemies. We chose alliance. Many doubted, some still do, but look at what we've built. He gestured to the mixed soldiers, the integrated command, the prosperity visible even in posture and health. We've proven that peace is possible, that enemies can become allies, that strength isn't just in domination, it's in choosing cooperation even when it's harder than conflict. He turned to Vex. Your 10-year sentence is lifted, effective today. You've earned full alpha status, territory, protection, everything promised. Vex looked shocked. 2 years? I've only served 2. You've served enough, Cade said. Rebuilt villages, integrated forces, prevented fractures. You've proven what needed proving. He extended his hand again. Same gesture from 2 years ago. Welcome. Not as subordinate, as equal. Vex took the hand, shook, voice rough when he spoke. Thank you for the chance. The hall erupted, celebration, relief, joy. Elena felt it through the bond. Cade's satisfaction, his hope, his belief that maybe, finally, the cycle of violence was breaking. That night, Marcus joined them on the balcony outside their quarters, unannounced but welcome. He looked out over the fortress, the mixed patrols, the integrated training, the evidence of peace built from war. I was wrong, he said, about everything, about peace being weakness, about alliances being temporary, about hope being dangerous. You were cautious, Cade corrected. That kept us alive long enough to take risks. Marcus shook his head. I was afraid. Afraid that hope would make us vulnerable, that trust would get us killed. Did it? Elena asked. No. Marcus's voice held wonder. It made us stronger. They stood together. 3 people who'd carried impossible weights alone, learning to share, learning to trust, learning that sometimes the bravest choice was vulnerability. Lyra stirred in Elena's arms, mumbled something unintelligible, settled again. "She'll never know the world we knew," Cade said quietly. "The constant war, the endless calculations, the fear." "Good," Elena said firmly. "Let her grow up believing peace is normal. Let that be the baseline." "And when conflicts arise?" Marcus asked. "Because they will. Then she'll have tools we didn't," Elena said. "Systems, precedent, example of how to choose peace. It won't be perfect, but it'll be better." 5 years later, Elena stood on the same balcony. Lyra was 6 now, running through the fortress with children of integrated packs, speaking 3 languages, learning diplomacy through play. The territories had expanded, not through conquest, through sanctuary, through alliance, through the slow, unglamorous work of choosing peace repeatedly. Vex had his own territory now, governed well, applied lessons learned, became the leader he'd always had the potential to be. Marcus had bonded again. To Sarah, a refugee alpha who'd found sanctuary in their territories. 2 people who'd lost everything finding something new together. Rowan trained the next generation of warriors, but the training emphasized protection over destruction, defense over offense, choosing peace over violence when possible. And Cade, 300 years old, finally at peace, not because the conflicts ended, but because he'd learned to carry them differently, with help, with partnership, with hope. Elena felt him approach, felt the bond pulse with warmth, with love, with shared understanding of how far they'd come. "Happy?" he asked, wrapping arms around her. "Tired," Elena admitted, "but yes, happy." They watched their daughter play, watched integrated soldiers train together, watched refugees arrive and find sanctuary, watched peace become normal. It wasn't perfect. Conflicts still arose, disputes still needed mediation, old wounds still ached. But they had systems now, processes, people who knew how to choose peace even when anger demanded violence. Elena thought about the healer's daughter who'd been conscripted 18 months ago, dragged from her village, forced into a war she didn't want, bonded to a mate she hadn't chosen. She'd become something she never expected. Queen, strategist, bridge between enemies, mother, builder of peace. Not through destiny, not through magic, through daily choices, through carrying weight together, through choosing to build instead of destroy. Again and again and again, until it stuck. Lyra laughed in the courtyard below, bright, joyful, innocent, growing up in a world where former enemies were trusted friends, where peace was habit, not exception, where hope was baseline, not luxury. "That's what we built," Elena whispered. "Yes," Cade agreed. "Against all odds, against 300 years of war. We built something that lasts." They stood together watching the future they'd created. Not perfect, but better. And better was enough. Better was everything.